Commander Zahir's fist crashed into the CIA contractor's jaw with a sickening thud, a sound that seemed to echo against the jagged, indifferent walls of the Afghan canyon. The force of the blow snapped the American's head sideways, a spray of crimson droplets painting the sun-bleached dust of the valley floor. Zahir didn't stop there. With the practiced cruelty of a man who had long ago traded his humanity for power, the Taliban leader reached down and grabbed a handful of the contractor's sweat-matted hair. He yanked the man upright, forcing his battered, swollen face toward the glass lens of the camera mounted on a rickety tripod. "Stream this live," Zahir snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that carried the weight of 1,000 threats. He spoke to his men and the world at large, his scarred lips curling into a predator's smile that showed yellowed teeth. He drew a serrated blade from a leather sheath at his hip and pressed the cold steel against the contractor's throat, just hard enough to draw a thin, bright line of crimson. Let Washington watch their man bleed. Let them see what happens when they send their spies into our mountains. The hostage let out a terrified, strangled whimper that echoed across the valley, a sound of pure, unadulterated hopelessness. Zahir's thumb tested the knife's edge, a casual gesture of violence that signaled the end was near. He wasn't just killing a man, he was staging a spectacle. 4,200 yards away, hidden among the rocks of a towering ridge, 15 of America's deadliest snipers were watching this scene through high-powered optics. They were the best the military had to offer, men who had spent their lives mastering the art of the long shot. And every single one of them had already failed. The clock was ticking toward a gruesome public execution, and according to the intelligence intercepted from the local frequencies, they were exactly 12 minutes away from the end. Then, a 26-year-old woman whom nobody in the unit respected, a woman who had spent the last 11 months cleaning their rifles and organizing their gear, stepped forward. She didn't ask for permission. She simply picked up the rifle. Before we dive deeper into the harrowing details of what transpired in those desperate, windswept mountains, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about courage, skill, and the thin line between the impossible and the legendary. And please, take a moment to comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see just how far this story of incredible resilience travels across the globe. Now, let's go back to that jagged mountain range where 15 of America's finest were staring down the barrel of their greatest failure. The SEAL team had been positioned on the ridge for 6 grueling hours. The sun had risen, baking the rocks until the air shimmered with heat, and Master Sergeant Blake Dalton could taste the failure in his mouth like a handful of copper pennies. It was a metallic, bitter taste he'd never experienced in 12 years of elite service. He had survived the meat grinder of Fallujah, the treacherous valleys of Helmand, and dozens of clandestine operations that had earned him 3 Bronze Stars, and a reputation that made younger snipers study his every movement like holy scripture. But this morning, September 15th, 2011, the wind in these God-forsaken Afghan mountains was making a fool of him, and he felt it with every fiber of his being. Lifting again his spotter, Sergeant Marcus Chen muttered beside him. Chen's eye was glued to the ranging scope, his body perfectly still despite the cramped conditions of their hide. Reading 8 to 10 miles per hour at our position, but look at those dust devils in the valley. They're spinning counterclockwise. That suggests a completely different thermal draft halfway to the target. Dalton didn't respond. He couldn't afford the breath. He was too busy running a frantic series of calculations in his head, a mental gymnastics routine that factored in the barrel temperature of his rifle, the thinning air at nearly 8,000 feet of altitude, and the decreasing air density as the morning warmed. He was even accounting for the Coriolis effect, the way the Earth literally rotated beneath the bullet during its 4-second flight time. To be exact, it was 2 seconds. In the world of precision shooting, 2 seconds is an eternity. It is a vacuum of time where 1,000 different variables can conspire to push around 6 inches left, 12 inches right, or 18 inches high. At this distance, the slightest heartbeat, the most infinitesimal tremor in his trigger finger, would be magnified into a miss by several yards. The distance to the target was 4,200 yards. That was 38 miles. In the sniper community, anything beyond 2,000 yards was considered an extreme long-range shot, a task for the elite of the elite. Beyond 3,000 yards, you were moving out of the realm of marksmanship and into the realm of the theoretical, where even the finest shooters in the world might succeed once in 20 tries. But 4,200 yards, that wasn't just difficult. It was damn near mythical. It was a distance that defied the very laws of ballistics as they were taught in the manuals. "Dalton, talk to me," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander James Hawkins through his earpiece. Hawkins was running the operation from a tactical command post 200 yards behind the sniper line, tucked into a shallow crevice. He was juggling a dozen different nightmares at once, coordinating with the command back at Bagram, dealing with a CIA station chief who was losing his mind over the captured contractor, and fielding calls from State Department officials who were already drafting the grim talking points for when the mission inevitably went sideways, and that execution video hit the international news cycles. "Working the problem, sir," Dalton replied, his voice remaining remarkably steady despite the cold sweat running down his spine beneath the heavy layers of his ghillie suit. "Target is in position. Hostage is visible. Wind conditions are challenging but manageable." It was a blatant lie, and both men knew it. The wind conditions weren't manageable, they were impossible. The air in the valley was a chaotic mess of cross-currents and vertical drafts, a literal invisible labyrinth through which a bullet had to pass. But what else was Dalton supposed to say? Was he supposed to admit that the United States Navy's premier sniper, the man who had made a confirmed kill at 3,200 yards in Iraq, the man who had literally written portions of the updated sniper manual, couldn't make the shot? Was he supposed to tell his commander that his training, his experience, and his God-given talent simply weren't enough to beat the mountain? "Take your time," Hawkins said, though his tone suggested he had none to give. "But not too much time. Intelligence says they are planning to execute him at 1,300 hours. That's 42 minutes from now." Dalton breathed slowly, consciously forcing his heart rate down, feeling the steady throb of his pulse in his fingertips where they rested on the custom-built M110 rifle. This weapon was more than just a tool. It was his baby. He had modified it over the course of years, adjusting the trigger pull to exactly 2.5 pounds, replacing the stock barrel with a custom-made Krieger barrel that had cost him 3 months of his salary, and hand-loading his own ammunition to tolerances that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. He had made shots with this rifle that had seemed to defy the very laws of physics. He had put rounds through windows the size of laptop screens from distances where most people couldn't even see the building itself. He had killed men who thought they were safe, men who believed that distance was an impenetrable suit of armor, only to learn too late that Blake Dalton could reach out and touch someone from a different zip code. But the mountains of Afghanistan didn't care about his reputation. The wind didn't care about his Bronze Stars or his tenure at the academy. And Commander Zahar, who was currently pacing back and forth behind the kneeling hostage like a shark circling wounded prey, certainly didn't care that the most dangerous sniper in the American military had him in his crosshairs. "Send it," Chen whispered. Dalton's finger took up the microscopic slack on the trigger. 2.5 pounds of pressure. That was all it would take. 2.5 pounds, and the 338 Lapua Magnum round would leave the barrel at 2,900 feet per second, beginning its long, lonely journey across a distance greater than 42 football fields. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, a familiar, sharp kick. The report echoed off the mountain walls, a thunderclap that seemed to roll through the canyon. Through his high magnification scope, Dalton watched the bullet's vapor trail, a faint, ghostly arc, cut through the morning air. He watched it climb, reaching the apex of its trajectory, before beginning its long descent toward the small, blurred figures in the valley below. The round impacted the ground 6 feet to the left of Commander Zahir, kicking up a small, mocking fountain of dust. "Miss," Chen called out. His voice was flat and professional, betraying none of the gut-punch disappointment they both felt. Left and low. The wind pushed it hard in the final 300 yards. Dalton worked the bolt, the metallic snick-snack of the action chambering another round sounding loud in the silence of the ridge. His movements were automatic, mechanical, fueled by 12 years of muscle memory, while his brain desperately recalculated, adjusted, and compensated. He needed more windage. He needed to account for a gust he couldn't even see. Second round, he announced to Hawkins, "Copy, 39 minutes. The second shot was high and right. The third was perfect on the horizontal windage, but it fell short by 3 yards, burying itself in the dirt. The fourth shot should have hit. Everything about it felt perfect, from the gentle, rhythmic squeeze of the trigger to the clean break of the sear, to the way the rifle's recoil pushed straight back into his shoulder without any lateral shift. He watched the vapor trail cutting through the air like a laser, but it missed by 2 feet, and in that moment, Dalton felt something crack inside his chest. It was a small fissure in the impenetrable wall of confidence that had sustained him through 100 missions. Taking a knee, he told Chen, pulling back from the rifle and wiping sweat from his eyes, "Give Mitchell a turn." Staff Sergeant Eric Mitchell moved into position. He was a younger sniper, a kid from Colorado who had grown up hunting elk in the high Rockies and understood mountain shooting in his very bones. Mitchell was good, maybe even great, and he was well on his way to becoming a legend in his own right. He had been Dalton's protege for 2 years, and there was a part of Dalton that truly hoped the younger man would succeed where he had failed. He wanted Mitchell to pull off the miracle, because at this point, a miracle was the only thing that would save the man in the valley. Mitchell's first round missed by 8 feet. His second missed by 5. His third round actually struck Commander Zahir's truck, punching a jagged hole through the rusted hood. For one beautiful, fleeting moment, Dalton thought maybe the ricochet would do the job. He thought maybe God himself was finally intervening. But Zahir didn't flinch. Instead, he just laughed. He actually laughed, throwing his head back and howling at the sky as if the American military's failure was the funniest thing he had ever experienced. "He knows," Chen said quietly, his voice heavy with a new kind of dread. "He knows we can't hit him from here. He's playing with us." "Yeah," Dalton replied, the word tasting like cold ashes. "He knows." Over the next 20 minutes, 3 more snipers took their turns. These were not amateurs. They were the apex predators of the infantry. Petty Officer Jake Sanders, who had qualified as an expert on every single rifle qualification since his first week in boot camp. Chief Petty Officer David Park, who had survived 3 harrowing tours in Iraq and had more confirmed kills than anyone cared to count in polite company. Sergeant First Class Anthony Rodriguez, who had won the international sniper competition 2 years running. Every single one of them missed. Some came agonizingly close. Rodriguez's second shot passed within 18 inches of Zahir's head, close enough that the Taliban commander actually flinched, his eyes widening in a brief moment of human fear before his arrogance returned. But close didn't count in this game. Close didn't save the hostage. Close didn't stop the execution that was now, according to the ticking seconds on Dalton's watch, only 21 minutes away. "Sir, request permission to move to a closer position," Dalton said into his radio. He hated the sound of defeat in his own voice, the way it wavered just slightly. "Negative," Hawkins replied immediately, his tone sharp. "You move off that ridge and you're completely exposed on the descent. They've got lookouts posted on every surrounding hill. You'd be dead before you made it half a kilometer, and then we'd have 16 hostages instead of 1. Then we need air support," Dalton pressed. "Drones strike. Fast movers, anything. The nearest drone is 90 minutes out, diverted to Kandahar for a high-value target priority. Fast movers are grounded due to a massive sandstorm south of Kabul. We're alone up here, Blake. It's just us and our rifles." Dalton wanted to punch the jagged rock in front of him. He wanted to scream at the sky. He wanted to do anything except sit there and watch as 15 of the most highly trained snipers in the world proved inadequate for the task at hand. This was supposed to be what they did. This was their entire purpose for existing. 1 shot, 1 kill, death from a distance. They were the silent professionals who were paid to make the impossible happen. Except today, the impossible was remaining stubbornly, mockingly impossible. And a good man was going to die because of it. Behind the sniper line, sitting in the meager shade of a supply truck and watching the entire disaster unfold with an expression that nobody bothered to notice, was Cassandra Brennan. She was 26 years old, 5'6", with her dark hair pulled back into a tight regulation bun. Her face was a mask of careful neutrality, the same face she had worn for the past 11 months she had been attached to this SEAL team. She wore the same dusty fatigues, carried the same M4 carbine, and wore the same combat patch on her shoulder as everyone else. But when the men looked at her, they didn't see a soldier. They saw the armorer. They saw the girl who maintained their weapons, the one who ordered their ammunition, the one who kept the armory organized and made sure the coffee pot was full during the 0300 pre-mission briefings. Cass had been watching each shot through a pair of high-end binoculars she had purchased with her own money, and she had been counting 15 shots, 15 failures. She had watched the dust kicked up by the impacts, noted the subtle patterns of the wind, and observed how each round was pushed left and down by the complex, invisible currents flowing through the valley. She had seen how the snipers were compensating, how they were adding more and more wind allowance to each shot, and how they were eventually overcompensating because they were fighting their own instincts. They were second-guessing their training because the mountain was lying to them. She knew something they didn't. She knew this shot wasn't impossible. It was just very, very difficult. And Cassandra Brennan had spent her entire life making difficult shots. Brennan were running low on hydration packs. Sergeant Chen called back to her. He didn't even turn his head to look in her direction. He just barked the order as if she were a piece of the equipment. "Can you run back to the supply cache and grab us a fresh case?" "Sure thing, Sergeant," Cass replied. Her voice was quiet, almost meek, fitting the persona she had adopted to survive in a community of hyper-masculine warriors. She stood up, dusted the fine Afghan silt from her pants, and started walking toward the cache, which was located about 100 yards behind their current position. But she only made it 50 yards before she stopped. She turned around and walked back. She had made a decision. It was a stupid decision, objectively speaking. It was a decision that would likely get her laughed at, mocked, or even officially reprimanded for breaking the chain of command. But the man down there in the valley, the contractor whose name she didn't even know, was about to die. He was about to die because 15 experts couldn't make a shot that she was fairly certain she could make. She wasn't certain. Nobody is ever certain at 2 miles, but she was pretty sure. And what was certainty anyway? She had never been certain of much in her life, except for the things her grandfather had taught her. Jack Brennan, a retired Marine Corps sniper from the Vietnam era, had been the man who raised her after her parents died. He was the one who had put a rifle in her hands when she was only 8 years old. He had taught her that shooting wasn't about strength or aggression or the size of your chest. It was about patience. It was about the ability to become absolutely still while the entire world moved around you. She had won the National Long-Range Championship 3 years ago, beating out men twice her age who had been shooting since before she was born. She had put 5 rounds into a 20-inch circle at 2,000 yards in a Wyoming wind that had sent other competitors packing their gear and headed for the parking lot. 4,200 yards was farther, much farther, but the principles were universal. The calculations were the same. The wind was still just air in motion. The bullet was still a piece of lead and copper governed by gravity, and the laws of physics didn't care whether you were a decorated Navy SEAL or an overlooked armorer who most of the team thought was just eye candy who happened to know the difference between 308 and 300 Win Mag. Dalton was lining up for his 5th attempt, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter when Cass approached. She stood there for a moment, waiting for him to notice her presence, but he was too deep in his own head, replaying every missed shot, every failed calculation, every tiny error. "Master Sergeant Dalton," she said quietly. "Not now, Brennan," he snapped without looking up from the optic. "Unless you've got a magic bullet in your pocket that can navigate this crosswind, I don't want to hear it." "I don't have a magic bullet, Master Sergeant," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, firm edge that made Chen glance back. "But I would like permission to take a shot." That got his attention. Dalton pulled back from his scope and looked at her as if she had just suggested they all start speaking Mandarin and surrender. Chen looked up too, his expression somewhere between genuine confusion and a mocking sort of amusement. From the positions on either side of them, Cass could feel other eyes turning her way. She could sense the sudden, sharp attention of men who had barely acknowledged her existence for nearly a year. "You want a what?" Dalton asked, his voice flat. "I'd like permission to attempt the shot, Master Sergeant." Chen actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound that he tried to cover with a cough when he saw the look on Cass's face. "Brennan, no offense, but this isn't the qualifying range at Camp Pendleton. This is an active combat situation with a human life hanging by a thread. We don't have time for—" "I know exactly what this is, Sergeant," Cass interrupted. She kept her voice level and professional, refusing to be baited. "I know that 15 shots have been taken and 15 shots have missed. And I know that the hostage has about 18 minutes left to live. So with all due respect, what exactly do we have to lose by letting me try?" Dalton stared at her for a long, silent moment. She could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He was weighing the tactical reality, the chain of command, and the massive blow to his own ego. He was thinking about what it would mean if the armorer, the girl who cleaned their rifles and made their coffee, succeeded where his entire elite team had failed. "You ever made a shot beyond 1,000 yards?" he asked finally. "Yes, Master Sergeant. My longest confirmed hit was 2,100 yards at the Nationals in Wyoming back in 2009. I also placed third at the King of 2 Miles competition in 2010. Chen's amused expression faded instantly. "Wait, you're that Brennan, C.J. Brennan? I read about that match in the journals. I thought C.J. was a guy." A lot of people thought that. Cass replied, "I never corrected anyone on the registration forms. Figured it might help me be taken seriously for once." "The King of 2 Miles is 3,500 yards, Dalton said slowly, his eyes narrowing as he reassessed everything he thought he knew about the woman who had been living in his blind spot. "You're telling me you've engaged targets at 3,500 yards? Successfully?" "Yes, Master Sergeant. Obviously, the reliability isn't the same as it is at closer distances, but I know the fundamentals. I know how to read the mirage at extreme distances. I know how to factor in the Coriolis effect, how to account for spin drift, and how to calculate bullet drop when your elevation adjustments run out and you're holding over by 30 mils. "Jesus Christ," Mitchell muttered from his position 10 feet away. "She's for real." Dalton looked at his watch, then looked back at the valley where Commander Zahir was now forcing the hostage to read from a prepared statement in front of the camera. The man's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the paper. Dalton looked back at Cass. She could see the calculation reaching its inevitable conclusion. They were out of options, out of time, and out of pride to protect. "Hawkins is going to have my ass for this," Dalton said, more to himself than to her. Then he keyed his radio. "Lieutenant Commander, I have a request that's going to sound completely insane." At this point, Dalton, "I'll take insane over helpless," Hawkins replied. "What have you got?" "I've got Petty Officer Brennan here, our armorer. It turns out she's a civilian long-range shooting champion, and she's requesting permission to attempt the shot." There was a long, heavy silence on the radio. It lasted so long that Cass thought the connection had been lost, or that Hawkins was consulting with someone high enough in the chain of command to shut the whole thing down before it could even start. "Your armorer," Hawkins said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "The armorer wants to take a combat shot at 4,200 yards to save a hostage's life." "That's correct, sir." Another pause. "Dalton, are you having some kind of psychological break? Do I need to pull you off that ridge?" "Negative, sir. I'm dead serious. She's got the credentials. National champion, podium finish at King of 2 Miles. She shot targets at 3,500 yards on a civilian range with unlimited time and zero stress." Hawkins countered, "This is combat. This is a human life. This is 16 minutes away from becoming a snuff film that CNN plays on a loop for the next month." Sir, Dalton interrupted, his voice firm. "We've taken 15 shots and missed every single one. At this point, what do we have to lose?" Hawkins went silent again. Cass could imagine him sitting there in his command tent, weighing the optics of the situation. If she took the shot and missed, it would be embarrassing, but ultimately just another miss in a long string of them. But if she made it, if she succeeded where 15 male snipers had failed, the story would follow this team for the rest of their lives. 5 minutes, Hawkins said abruptly. "She gets one shot and she gets 5 minutes to take it. After that, we're calling in a danger close strike on our own position if we have to, because I am not watching that execution happen. Are we clear?" "Crystal, sir," Dalton replied. He looked at Cass and nodded toward his rifle. "It's all yours, Brennan. Show us what you've got." Cass moved into the rifle position, and the first thing she noticed was that everything was wrong. Dalton had configured the weapon for his body, his eye, and his specific shooting style. The buttstock was too long for her frame, the cheek rest was too high, and the scope's eye relief was set for someone at least 6 inches taller. Cass dropped to her knees behind the rifle and immediately began making adjustments. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, clicking the buttstock in 3 notches, lowering the cheek rest and shifting her body position to compensate for what she couldn't fix in 30 seconds. Every second was a heartbeat the hostage didn't have. "You need me to spot for you?" Chen asked, his skepticism now warring with a desperate kind of hope. "No," Cass replied, her eye already pressed to the optic. "I need absolute silence. Everyone stops breathing if you can." She could feel them watching her, 15 sets of eyes belonging to professional warriors who had just watched their own skills prove inadequate. Now, they were forced to put their faith in someone they had treated like furniture. The weight of their stares pressed against her shoulders like lead, but she had learned long ago how to shut out the world. Her grandfather had taught her that shooting wasn't an act of the body, it was an act of the mind. Through the scope, she saw Commander Zahir. He was pacing with the energy of a man who knew he was winning. She could see the camera on its spindly tripod, the small cluster of Taliban fighters standing around like they were on a movie set. She could see the hostages' shoulders shaking. 4,200 yards. She let the number settle into her brain. The bullet would drop approximately 387 feet over that distance. That was nearly the height of a 40-story building. She would have to aim so far above Zahir that he wouldn't even be in the center of her scope. The wind was shifting between 8 and 12 miles per hour, but it wasn't consistent. She could see 3 distinct layers of wind just by watching the dust patterns. There was a light, variable breeze near the ground, a much stronger current at the mid-level where the bullet would spend the majority of its flight, and a strange, swirling vortex near the ridge. She closed her eyes for a split second, visualizing the path. She wasn't just shooting a gun. She was launching a tiny, copper-jacketed vessel on a journey through a chaotic sea of air. She adjusted the elevation turret, clicking it until it hit the mechanical stop, and then she held over the rest. She was aiming at a specific, unremarkable rock formation hundreds of feet above the valley floor. She felt her heartbeat slow. Her breathing became shallow, rhythmic. The world narrowed down to the space between her eye and the glass. She waited for the lull. She waited for the moment when the 3 layers of wind aligned, just for a heartbeat. There. Cassandra Brennan squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared and she didn't watch the target. She watched the vapor trail. She watched as her bullet climbed into the thin blue sky, a tiny speck of defiance against the impossible. She counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The valley below erupted in a small, violent burst of red. Commander Zahir didn't just fall, he was erased. The 338 round, still carrying massive kinetic energy, struck him squarely in the chest, folding him backward as if he'd been hit by an invisible freight train. The Taliban fighters froze, their mouths agape, staring at the empty space where their leader had stood a second before. On the ridge, the silence was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Dalton let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade. "Confirmed hit," Chen whispered, his voice trembling. "My God." She actually did it. But Cass didn't celebrate. She was already working the bolt, chambering the next round, her eyes never leaving the scope. She had one more person to save. The air on the ridge was thin and tasted of ancient dust and gun oil, a dry, metallic flavor that seemed to coat the back of Cass's throat. Below her, the valley was a shimmering tapestry of heat, haze, and jagged rock, a landscape that looked more like the surface of the moon than anything belonging to Earth. For the snipers surrounding her, men who had spent their lives training on high-tech ranges with computerized targets, the valley was an obstacle to be overcome. They saw the wind as a chaotic enemy, a series of invisible walls that kept knocking their bullets off course. They were fighting it, dialing in more and more correction with every missed shot, their frustration mounting as the seconds ticked away. But Cass, peering through the high-powered glass of the optic, saw something entirely different. She didn't see walls, she saw a river. Like any river, the air moving through the Afghan valley had its own currents and eddies. There were places where the flow was heavy and laminar and places where it swirled in unpredictable circles against the cliff faces. To the others, it was noise. To Cass, it was music. She could see the way the dust devils organized themselves, the way the heat mirage danced and broke, revealing the secret path the air was taking. She wasn't trying to fight the wind. She was looking for a way to slide into its rhythm. She was searching for the current that would carry her lead gift all the way to its destination. 10 minutes, Hawkins' voice crackled over the radio. The commander's tone was tight, a thin wire of tension that threatened to snap. He was watching the same drone feed they all were, seeing the clock run down on a man's life. Cass didn't acknowledge the transmission. She couldn't afford to. Her mind was already occupied, operating like a high-speed processor, churning through variables that would have made a physics professor's head spin. The distance was staggering, over 4,000 yards. At that range, the world didn't behave the way people thought it did. The bullet would be in the air for exactly 4.3 seconds. In that brief window of time, a person could take a breath, a heart could beat 4 or 5 times, and a life could end or be saved. During those seconds, the round would travel through 3 distinct wind zones, each with its own speed and direction. It would climb high into the thinner air of the upper atmosphere before plunging back down toward the target. And then there were the invisible forces of the planet itself. At this latitude, the Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, would nudge the bullet 7 inches to the right. The spin drift caused by the rifle's right-hand twist would add another 4 inches of rightward drift. It was a game of inches played over miles. As the bullet traveled, it would bleed velocity. The slower it went, the more the wind would grab it, exerting more influence the closer it got to the target. It was a decaying orbit, a piece of metal falling through a moving sky. Cass dialed the elevation turret on her scope until it hit the mechanical stop. She had run out of vertical adjustment. To make the shot, she would have to use the reticle itself for additional holdover. 22 milliradians. It was an absurd amount. If she held that high, the target, the man she was trying to kill, wouldn't even be visible in her scope. She would be aiming at a blank patch of blue sky, trusting in the cold, hard certainty of mathematics to bring the bullet down onto a human-sized target 2.4 miles away. Brennan, Dalton said quietly. Cass felt his presence beside her, a shadow in the periphery of her vision. There was something new in his voice, a tremor of something that wasn't quite respect yet, but it was the beginning of it. It was the sound of a man realizing he was standing next to something he didn't understand. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "Nobody's going to think less of you if you can't make it. Nobody expects this to work." Cass didn't take her eye away from the scope. Her world was reduced to the circle of glass and the crosshairs etched onto it. "They already think less of a master sergeant," she replied, her voice as flat and steady as the horizon. "They've been thinking less of me since the day I showed up at this command. They see the armor, the girl who fixes the toys, the one who handles the paperwork and keeps the coffee pot full. I've got nothing to lose and everything to prove. If I miss, I'm just what they thought I was. If I hit, well, then the world changes." She settled into the rifle, feeling the cold steel of the chassis against her cheek. She began the rhythmic breathing her grandfather had taught her back in Montana. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. A slow, steady cycle designed to oxygenate the blood without sending the heart into a frenzy. Her pulse was elevated. It was impossible for it not to be with the weight of a man's life resting on her index finger, but she could work with it. She had spent years shooting competitive matches with her heart hammering at 120 beats per minute. She had learned to treat her heartbeat not as a distraction, but as a metronome. She would time the trigger press to fall in that tiny, silent window between beats, that fraction of a second where the body is perfectly, unnaturally still. The wind shifted again. Down in the valley, the dust devils reorganized their dance, spinning in a new direction. The sustained wind was picking up, hitting maybe 12 miles per hour with gusts reaching 15. It changed the entire equation. It meant she had to move her hold off by another 2 milliradians to the left. She adjusted her mental map, recalculating the arc in real time. 8 minutes, Hawkins said. The urgency was a physical weight now. In the valley below, the scene was reaching a breaking point. Through the high magnification lens, Cass saw Zahir reach out and grab the hostage by the back of his neck. The contractor looked small and broken, his spirit exhausted by the heat and the terror. Zahir forced the man's head up, making him look directly into the camera lens of the propaganda team. The Taliban commander was shouting something, his mouth moving in a silent tirade of hate. Cass didn't need to hear the words. She could see the knife in his other hand. She saw the way he tested the edge, the way he positioned his body, bracing himself for the mechanical motion of an execution. This wasn't going to take 8 minutes. The clock had run out. It was going to happen in the next 60 seconds. "Boss, she needs to take the shot now," Chen said, his voice rising in an urgent whisper. "He's moving into the execution position. He's going to do it." "Brennan," Dalton asked. It wasn't a command. It was a question, a plea. "I see it," Cass replied. Her finger found the trigger, the pad of her skin resting against the cold, curved metal. 2.5 pounds of pressure. That was the only thing standing between the present moment and the bullet screaming out of the barrel. At that moment, those 2.5 pounds felt like 2.5 tons. She made one final microscopic adjustment to her aim point, staring into the empty sky above the target. She was trusting her read of the wind, trusting the numbers that had flowed through her head, and most of all, trusting the ghost of her grandfather. She remembered those long, golden afternoons on the ranch in Montana, the old man standing over her shoulder, telling her that physics didn't care about your gender, your rank, or whether the men around you believed in you. Physics was the ultimate truth. If you understood it and respected it, it would work for you. If you ignored it, it would destroy you. Sending it, she whispered. The trigger broke like a glass rod. The rifle slammed back into her shoulder with a violent, familiar kick. The massive muzzle brake redirected the gases, kicking up a sudden, violent cloud of dust around her position on the ridge. Cass didn't blink. She stayed pinned to the rifle, her eye glued to the optic, watching the world through the recoil. She saw the vapor trail, the bullets wake through the air, arc up and up, a faint, ghostly line climbing into the blue Afghan sky. It looked like a prayer made visible, a silver thread connecting her to the valley floor. 4.3 seconds. It was the longest stretch of time Cass had ever experienced. It felt as though the entire universe had slowed down, crystallizing into a single, frozen moment. She could hear the blood rushing through her own ears, a rhythmic thrumming that matched the distant sound of the wind. She could hear the short, anxious breaths of the men standing behind her. The bullet was out there now, a tiny piece of copper and lead hurtling through the atmosphere, subject to the whims of the air and the spin of the world. It dropped toward the valley, falling through the wind layers she had mapped out in her mind. Below, Commander Zahir was raising his knife. He grabbed the hostage's hair, pulling the man's head back to expose the pale line of his throat. He was a second away from the kill. Impact. The round struck Zahir in the upper chest, just below the left collarbone. The force of a high-caliber round at that distance was still immense. The commander's body didn't just fall, it jerked backward as if he had been yanked by an invisible rope. The knife flew from his hand, spinning through the air and landing in the dirt. He took 2 stumbling, uncoordinated steps, his face frozen in a mask of absolute bug-eyed shock, and then he collapsed onto his back, his life spilling out into the dust of the valley. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Nobody moved. Not Cass, not the elite snipers crowded around her, and not the Taliban fighters in the valley below. They all stared at their fallen leader with the same paralyzed disbelief. The vacuum of the moment was thick and suffocating. "Holy Mother of God," Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. She made it. She actually made it. Chen was already reacting, his fingers flying over his radio. "Confirmed. Target down, hostile commander neutralized. Repeat, Zahir is down." The valley erupted into instant, frantic chaos. The Taliban fighters scattered like ants from a crushed hill. Some ran for the idling vehicles, their boots kicking up plumes of dust, while others dove behind rocks and low walls looking for a threat they couldn't see. They were terrified, gripped by the realization that their leader had just been struck down by a ghost. From their perspective, the shot had come from nowhere, from a distance that should have been impossible for any human marksman. The hostage remained where he was, frozen on his knees, his hands still bound behind his back. His face was spattered with the blood of the man who had been about to kill him, his eyes wide and vacant as he tried to process the fact that he was still breathing. "Brennan, can you see the hostage?" Hawkins' voice was barking through the comms now, the professional mask back in place but cracked by adrenaline. "Is he mobile?" Cass swept her scope across the killing zone, her movements fluid and mechanical. The contractor was starting to move, the primal instinct for survival finally overriding his shock. He began to crawl away from Zahir's body, trying to make himself small, trying to find cover. But his hands were still tied and he was clumsy with fear. There were still 8 Taliban fighters in the immediate vicinity, and their initial panic was already beginning to transform into a desperate, vengeful rage. "He's alive, but restrained," Cass reported, her voice remarkably calm given the situation. "Multiple hostiles still in the immediate area. They're starting to regroup. Give them 15 seconds and they'll be back on him." "Then don't give them 15 seconds," Hawkins shot back. "You've got the rifle, Brennan. Keep shooting." Cass didn't need the order. She was already working the bolt, the heavy steel sliding back and forward with a metallic clack that sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. She chambered a fresh round, her eyes already hunting for the next threat. One of the fighters was shouting, trying to rally his men. He was pointing toward the ridge, his eyes searching the high ground. He had likely seen the faint puff of dust from her muzzle blast. He was the leader now, the one who would coordinate the counterattack. He was the next problem to solve. She settled the crosshairs on him, making a quick, intuitive adjustment for the wind based on the dust patterns still swirling in her scope. She didn't have to think about the math this time. It was already there, ingrained in her muscles and her vision. She pressed the trigger. 4.3 seconds later, the fighter dropped in his tracks. The round caught him center mass, folding him like a piece of paper. He hit the ground hard and stayed there. "Two down," Chen shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. "She's 2 for 2 at 4,000 yards. This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible." But Cass wasn't listening to the cheers. She was focused on the 6 remaining men. One of them had broken cover and was sprinting toward the hostage, a rifle in his hand. His intentions were clear. If they couldn't keep the prize, they would destroy it. Cass had 5 seconds to stop him. She led the running man by 3 full body lengths, calculating his speed against the flight time of the bullet. It was a lead that felt insane, aiming at nothing in the hopes that the target would run into the lead. The rifle bucked. The fighter's legs went out from under him mid-stride, and he tumbled forward, his momentum carrying him through the dirt in a messy sprawl. 3, Dalton said. There was no more skepticism in his voice. It was pure, unadulterated awe. 3 for 3. "Brennan, whoever the hell you really are, you're making history right now." The remaining fighters had finally figured out the general direction of the fire. They began to lay down suppressive fire, sending wild, desperate bursts from their AK-47s toward the ridge. The rounds weren't even close. At this distance, an AK was about as effective as throwing a handful of gravel. But Cass could hear the faint, high-pitched snaps of the bullets breaking the sound barrier somewhere high above their position. "Incoming fire. Incoming fire," Rodriguez called out, instinctively ducking lower behind his spotting scope. "They're shooting back. Let them shoot," Hawkins snapped over the radio. "They can't hit anything at that range. They're just making noise." "Brennan, keep working. Clear the field." Cass was already in a rhythm. 4th shot, 5th shot, 6th shot. Each one was a separate, complex calculation. Each one required her to read the shifting mirage and the pulsing wind, to trust the math and her own steady hands. The 4th shot was her first miss. A gust caught the bullet and sent it sailing just inches over a fighter's head as he dove for the safety of a stone hut. She didn't let it rattle her. She simply adjusted and fired again. The 5th shot found its mark, dropping a man who was trying to flank the hostage's position. The 6th shot was different. She saw the propaganda team's camera on its tripod, the lens pointed toward the carnage. She shifted her aim and squeezed. The camera shattered into 1,000 pieces of plastic and glass, ending any chance the Taliban had of using the day's events for their cause. 6 shots, 5 hits, Chen reported, his voice hushed. "That's an 83% hit rate at 4,200 yards. That's not a statistic. That's a miracle," but it wasn't a miracle. It was Cass Brennan, the woman they had spent nearly a year ignoring. The armorer they had treated like a ghost. The girl they had asked to fetch supplies and stay out of the way while the real operators did the work. She was putting on a shooting clinic that would be talked about in the halls of every sniper school on the planet for the next 20 years. Every trigger press was a masterclass in patience and precision. She was doing things with a rifle that these men had been told were physically impossible. The 3 remaining Taliban fighters decided they had seen enough. The mysterious, long-range death from the sky had broken their will. They abandoned the hostage, abandoned their dead, and scrambled for a pickup truck parked near the edge of the village. The engine roared to life, and the truck began to bounce away over the rough terrain, kicking up a massive screen of dust. "They are running," Mitchell called, vehicle moving, heading east. Cass swung the rifle, tracking the truck through the glass. It was accelerating fast, moving erratically. She could try for a shot, maybe punch a hole through the engine block or the driver's side door, but the probability of a hit was dropping with every passing second as the distance increased. "Let them go," Hawkins ordered. "Focus on the objective. Secure the hostage. Ground team, you are clear to move in. Brennan, stay on that rifle. Keep overwatch on the contractor. If anything so much as twitches near him, I want it dead." "Copy," Cass said. She settled her crosshairs back on the area around the hostage. He was struggling with his restraints now, his body shaking with the aftershocks of what he had just witnessed. The wounded fighter she had shot in the leg was still writhing in the dirt 30 yards away, but he had lost his weapon and was no longer a threat. The rest of the valley was silent, save for the wind. "Clear," Cass reported. "No movement near the hostage. Ground team is clear to advance." She watched through the scope as a 4-man SEAL element, which had been positioned much closer to the valley floor, broke from their cover. They moved with the practiced, lethal efficiency of a predator, covering the broken ground in less than 3 minutes. They reached the contractor, cut his zip ties, and performed a quick sweep for injuries. "Hostage secured?" The call came over the net. "He's banged up and in shock, but he's mobile. We're moving to the secondary extraction point." Cass finally pulled her face away from the rifle. The moment she broke her seal with the weapon, the adrenaline hit her like a physical blow. Her hands began to shake. a fine, uncontrollable tremor that made her fingers feel like they belonged to someone else. She had fired 8 shots at extreme long range under the most intense combat conditions imaginable, with a man's life hanging on every millisecond of flight time. 6 hits, at 4,200 yards. It was the greatest achievement of her life, and it had happened in front of 15 witnesses who would never look at her the same way again. Dalton was staring at her as if she had just walked on water. Chen's mouth was literally hanging open. Mitchell, the man who had been the most vocal about her presence on the ridge, had stood up and was walking toward her, shaking his head in a slow arc of disbelief. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Dalton asked. The question wasn't a challenge anymore. There was no edge of aggression or doubt. It was genuine, humble curiosity. "Montana," Cass replied. Her voice was a little unsteady, the dry air finally catching up with her. "My grandfather's ranch. He was a scout sniper in Vietnam. He started teaching me when I was 8 years old. He didn't believe in toys. He believed in rifles." "Your grandfather?" Chen repeated, his voice climbing an octave. "Your grandfather taught you to make combat hits at 4,000 yards. He taught me how to read the wind," Cass corrected him. "He taught me to trust the math over my own instincts. He always said the hardest shot in the world is just a series of small problems. If you solve each problem correctly, the shot makes itself. Most people miss at this range because they overthink it. They get inside their own heads. They start fighting the environment instead of working with it." Dalton glanced down at his own rifle, the weapon that had failed him 4 times in a row. "I was fighting it," he admitted. His voice was low, meant only for those standing near him. "Every shot, I was adding more wind, trying to muscle the bullet onto the target. I was in my own head." "You were shooting like a military sniper," Cass said, and she didn't mean it as an insult. It was just a statement of fact. Military shooting is built on consistency. It's about taking the same shot the same way every time in known conditions. But out here, there's no such thing as a known condition. The wind changes every 30 seconds. The mirage shifts with the sun. You can't fight the valley, Master Sergeant. You have to adapt to it. Rodriguez, Sanders, and Park had joined the circle now. They were looking at Cass with entirely new eyes. For 11 months, she had been a background character in their lives, the quiet girl who kept the armory organized and the rifles clean. Now they were seeing the predator beneath the skin. "I owe you an apology," Rodriguez said bluntly. "I've been on this team for months, and I don't think I've said 10 words to you that weren't about gear or supplies. I just assumed. Well, I assumed you were here because the Navy was checking a box. I thought you were a diversity hire. I was wrong. I was completely and utterly wrong. We were all wrong," Dalton added. He stepped forward and held out his hand. "That was the finest display of long-range marksmanship I have ever witnessed in my life. I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen anything that even comes close to what you just did. Thank you for saving that man, and thank you for saving the reputation of this team." Cass took his hand. His palm was calloused and firm, the grip of a man who was genuinely humbled. "I just did what needed to be done, Master Sergeant, the same as any of you would have." "No," Chen said, shaking his head. "Not the same. None of us could do that. We tried 15 times and we failed 15 times. You stepped up when the pressure was at its peak and you made it look like a Sunday afternoon at the range." "It wasn't easy," Cass whispered, her eyes drifting back toward the valley where the dust was beginning to settle over the bodies. "Believe me, it wasn't easy." The sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel announced Hawkins' arrival. The commander came striding up the ridge, his face flushed from the climb and the intensity of the last 20 minutes. He looked at Cass, then at the rifle, and then down at the valley floor where the broken remnants of Zahir's command lay scattered. "Petty Officer Brennan," he said, his voice formal and echoing with authority. "I'm going to need a full, detailed debrief on every second of this engagement. I want you to walk me through every calculation, every hold-off, and every decision you made. Because what I just watched from the command post was either the luckiest string of shots in the history of human warfare, or it was a level of skill that I didn't even know was possible." "It wasn't luck, sir," Dalton interrupted. "I was right here. I watched her work. I watched her read 3 different wind layers and adjust on the fly. She wasn't guessing. She knew exactly where those bullets were going the moment they left the barrel." Hawkins nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Cass. "Then we need to understand exactly what she knows. Because if Brennan can shoot like this, and if she can teach others to see the world the way she does, it changes everything about how we conduct long-range operations. It changes the nature of the battlefield." He paused, his expression softening just a fraction. How many people know you can do this, petty officer? Just me and my grandfather, sir, Cass said. I never talked about it. I didn't think anyone would take me seriously. An armorer telling a room full of SEALs she can outshoot them. I would have been laughed out of the room before I finished the sentence. You won't be laughed at now, Mitchell said, leaning against a rock. Not after today. After today, you're a legend. You're the woman who made the 4,000-yard hit. The rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors began to vibrate through the air, growing louder as the extraction birds approached. The ground team had reached the landing zone with the hostage, and the mission was transitioning into its final phase. The crisis that had been spiraling toward a national disaster 15 minutes ago was now a resounding success. And everyone on that ridge knew that the success belonged to the woman with the dust on her face and the trembling hands. Cass began the mechanical process of breaking down her rifle. She cleared the weapon, removed the magazine, and checked the chamber with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. As she worked, she felt a strange sense of peace. For 11 months, she had felt invisible. She had felt undervalued, like a high-performance engine being used to power a lawnmower. She had watched her own skills rust while she maintained the weapons of men who didn't even know her name. Now, that was over. The weight of being just the armorer had been lifted. Brennan, Hawkins said, stepping closer as she finished packing the rifle into its transit case. When we get back to Bagram, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about your future, because I don't think you're going to be spending much more time behind a supply desk. Cass looked up at him. What do you mean, sir? I mean that what you did today changes the math, Hawkins said. It changes how I build teams. It changes how I think about talent. I'm going to put a request in to move you into an operational role. How would you feel about becoming a primary sniper? About stepping out of the armory and into the field permanently? The question seemed to hang in the air, vibrating in the space between them. Around her, the other snipers had gone quiet, their eyes fixed on her. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the door she had been trying to find for her entire career. I'd like that, sir, Cass said simply. I'd like that very much. Good, Hawkins replied, because we're going to need you. Once this mission report hits the higher-ups, once the word gets out about what happened on this ridge, everyone is going to want a piece of you. They're going to want to know how you did it. You're going to be the most in-demand shooter in the Navy. The helicopters were touching down now, their massive downwash kicking up a blinding storm of grit and sand. The ground team was already loading the contractor onto the lead bird, moving quickly to get him to the medical teams waiting at the base. The mission was done. As Cass gathered her gear and prepared to move toward the landing zone, she felt Dalton's hand on her shoulder one more time. He leaned in close to her ear to be heard over the roar of the rotors. One more thing, he said. That first shot, the one that took out Zahir. I've been running the numbers in my head while we were waiting. At that distance with that wind, the correction should have been at least 6 or 7 milliradians to the left. But I saw your reticle. You only held 4. How did you know? Cass smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time all day. The dust in the valley showed 3 layers, she explained. Most of the flight was through the middle layer at 8 miles per hour. But the lower layer, the one right around the target, was only moving at 4. If I had held for the full wind value, the bullet would have overcorrected and missed him to the right. I split the difference and trusted the math. Dalton stared at her for a long beat, his eyes wide. Then he let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh, a sound of pure admiration. You read 3 wind layers in a combat zone and calculated a split hold on the fly. Jesus Christ, Brennan, you're not just good. You're operating on a level the rest of us haven't even dreamed of yet. They moved toward the helicopters together, the team falling into a natural formation around her. It was a subtle shift, but a profound one. These men, who had looked right through her for nearly a year, were now walking beside her. They were treating her as a peer, as a sister-in-arms. She had earned her place not with words or complaints, but with 8 trigger presses and a feat of marksmanship that would live forever in the annals of special operations. The ride back to Bagram was loud and turbulent, the helicopter bucking through the mountain passes. Conversation was impossible over the scream of the engines, but Cass didn't mind the silence. She sat on the bench, her gear stowed at her feet, and looked across at the rescued contractor. He was wrapped in a green wool blanket, his eyes fixed on the floor, his chest heaving as he finally began to process the fact that he was alive. She looked at her hands. They had finally stopped shaking. She felt a deep, resonant calm, the kind of peace that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you are capable of. She wasn't just the girl from Montana anymore. She wasn't just the armorer who fixed the SEALs' rifles. She was the shooter who had seen the river in the wind and followed it all the way home. As the base at Bagram appeared on the horizon, a sprawling island of lights and concrete in the middle of the dark Afghan wilderness, Cass Brennan knew that her life would never be the same again. The world had seen what she could do, and there was no going back to the shadows. The vibrations of the MH-60 Black Hawk hummed through the soles of Cass's boots, a rhythmic thrumming that usually felt grounding, but today felt like a countdown. Across from her, the contractor she had just saved huddled beneath a crinkling thermal blanket. His face was a roadmap of the trauma he'd endured, swollen, bruised, and smeared with the dust of the valley. Yet his eyes remained fixed on her. Every few minutes his lips would move, silently mouthing a thank you that was drowned out by the scream of the turbine engines. Each time, Cass would offer a stiff, awkward nod and look away. She had spent the last 11 months as an invisible fixture of the armory, a shadow among shadows, and the sudden weight of being a savior was more stifling than the dry heat of the Afghan air. When the helicopter finally touched down at Bagram, the dust cloud kicked up by the rotors hadn't even begun to settle before she saw him. Standing on the edge of the tarmac, framed by the harsh glare of the base floodlights, was Colonel Marcus Vance. He was a man carved out of granite, with hair the color of industrial steel and a chest full of medals that narrated 30 years of conflict. Beside him stood Lieutenant Commander Hawkins, both men looking like statues against the frantic movement of the medical teams rushing to the aircraft. Vance didn't wait for the rotors to stop their dying whine. He stepped forward as soon as the door slid open. Vance shook hands with Hawkins first, a brief and professional acknowledgement, but his focus was singular. He walked straight toward Cass, his boots clicking rhythmically on the asphalt. "Petty Officer Brennan," he said, his voice cutting through the mechanical noise like a blade. "I've been on the radio with JSOC for the past 30 minutes. They aren't asking for a status report. They're demanding a miracle explanation. They want numbers, they want methodology, and they want to understand how a Navy armorer managed to land 6 consecutive hits at a distance where 15 of my most seasoned snipers couldn't even find the paper." Cass felt the blood rush to her face, the marks of the mission still fresh on her own skin. "Sir, I'm not sure what to tell them," she began, her voice sounding small even to her own ears. "I think I just got lucky with the wind conditions. It was a localized pocket, and don't give me humble," Vance interrupted, cutting her off with a sharp, dismissive gesture that silenced the entire group. "I've seen the spotter reports from the ridge. I've spoken with Master Sergeant Dalton, a man who doesn't hand out praise unless it's earned in blood. Luck doesn't put 6 rounds on a moving target at 4,200 yards. Luck is 1 hit and 7 misses. What you did out there was pure, unadulterated skill, and I need to know right now if it's repeatable." The air between them felt pressurized. Cass swallowed hard, feeling the grit of the desert in her throat. "It's repeatable, sir," she said, her voice finding its steel. "Under the right conditions, with the right optics and enough time to map the wind layers, yes, it's repeatable." Vance studied her for a long, calculating moment. His eyes were like a pair of scanners, looking for any sign of a tremor or a lie. "How long have you been able to shoot like this?" he asked quietly. "Since I was 16, sir. That's when my grandfather started entering me into long-range precision matches. I won my first national championship at 18. The colonel's jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. "And nobody in your chain of command knew about this. Nobody thought to test your capabilities beyond a basic rifle qualification on a flat range." "I told my recruiter about the competitive circuit when I enlisted, sir," Cass replied, a hint of long-buried frustration bubbling to the surface. "I told my commanding officer at my first duty station. But when you're a woman in a combat support role, people tend to hear what they expect to hear. They heard the word armorer and they stopped listening. They saw a girl who could fix a jammed bolt and didn't look any further." Vance's expression didn't soften, but the intensity of his gaze shifted. "That's going to change," he said. "As of this moment, you're being pulled from the armory. You're temporarily assigned to my personal staff until we figure out exactly what to do with you. I'm not having a shooter of your caliber organizing supply closets or making coffee runs while there's a war on." "Hawkins, is there a problem with that?" Hawkins didn't hesitate. "No problem at all, sir. In fact, I was planning to make the same recommendation. Brennan is being wasted where she is." The colonel gave a sharp nod. "Good. Brennan, grab your gear and report to the TOC in 30 minutes. We need to debrief this mission while the data is fresh. and I want you to walk the intelligence staff through every single decision you made on that ridge. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, sir, Cass said, snapping a salute. As Vance strode away, already barking orders into a handheld radio, Cass stood frozen on the tarmac. The world felt like it was spinning in the wrong direction. In the span of a single helicopter ride, she had gone from a technician to a person of interest. She felt a presence at her elbow and turned to see Chen, one of the few people who had treated her like a human being over the last year. He was grinning, his teeth white against a face covered in grime. "Welcome to the big leagues, Brennan," Chen said. "Colonel Vance doesn't personally debrief missions unless they are significant. You didn't just make a shot today, you became significant. Better get moving. The brass hates to wait." The debriefing room was a windowless box filled with the hum of high-end servers and the smell of stale coffee. It was packed with officers, intelligence analysts, and grim-faced men in civilian tactical gear who Cass assumed were from the more secretive corners of the command. For 3 hours, she was the center of their universe. She stood at a whiteboard, marker in hand, drawing complex diagrams of the mountain air currents. She explained the mathematics of her shot sequence with the detached precision of a physics professor. She spoke about the Coriolis effect, the way the Earth's rotation literally pulled the target away from the bullet's path during its long flight. She talked about spin drift and the way she had to factor in the specific density of the air at that altitude. But mostly, she talked about the wind. When you say you were reading 3 distinct wind layers, how exactly were you determining that? Asked a captain named Sarah Mendes, her pen hovering over a notebook. "What are you looking at through the glass?" "It's about the dust, primarily," Cass explained, drawing a series of arrows at different elevations on the board. "The way the dust moves at the surface tells you one thing, but if you look at the scrub brush or the way the heat shimmer, the mirage, is dancing at 2,000 yards, you see a completely different story. If there's vegetation, I watch the grass for the surface wind, but I watch the trees for the wind higher up. You have to build a mental model of the entire air column between the muzzle and the target. It's not a single calculation, it's a living, breathing map. And you can do this quickly." A major from JSOC asked from the shadows at the back of the room. "Under combat pressure, with lives on the line?" "Yes, sir," Cass said. "It becomes automatic. Like a professional athlete doesn't consciously calculate the arc of a ball. After thousands of repetitions, your brain just processes the variables. I've been reading wind since I was a teenager. My brain does the math before I even realize I'm thinking about it." The major stood up, his face skeptical. "Miss Brennan, I've been a sniper instructor for nearly a decade. What you're describing is postgraduate level ballistics. No disrespect to your grandfather, but this goes beyond what even the most elite shooters are taught in the pipeline. Where did you actually learn the nuance of this?" Cass met his gaze without blinking. "My grandfather learned the basics in Vietnam, sir, but he became obsessed after the war. He read every technical manual, every white paper on ballistics, and every civilian competition journal he could find. When I showed an interest, he poured 40 years of obsession into me. Then when I started competing, I had access to the best long-range shooters in the country, men who had spent their entire lives perfecting the craft. I'm not a product of a military school. I'm a product of a lifetime of specialized practice." The room went silent for a beat. Mendes was the one to break it. "This is going to be a problem," she said, her voice soft but serious. "After today, once this report hits the higher-ups, you are going to have a target on your back. Not from the enemy, but from the bureaucracy. Some people will see you as an asset, others will see you as an embarrassment to their training programs. Are you prepared for that kind of attention?" Cass looked at her calloused hands, the hands of an armorer, then back at the room full of officers. "No, ma'am," she admitted. "Probably not. But I'd rather deal with the attention for being good at my job than go back to being invisible. At least now, people know what I can do." By the time the debriefing wrapped up, it was well after 1900 hours. The adrenaline that had carried Cass through the day was beginning to evaporate, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel like lead. As she stepped out of the TOC into the cool desert night, she found Master Sergeant Dalton waiting for her. He was leaning against a concrete T-wall, his arms crossed over his chest. "They work you over pretty good in there?" he asked, his voice lacking the usual sharp edge he used with the support staff. "They were thorough," Cass replied, rubbing her eyes. "They wanted to know everything from my wind calls to what I had for breakfast 3 years ago." Dalton pushed off the wall and fell into step beside her as she started the long walk toward the barracks. Yeah, get used to it. Words already tearing through the base. I've had half a dozen guys from different teams ask me if it's true, if our armorer really tagged a target at over 4,000 yards. Most of them think it's a tall tale, a ghost story to keep the insurgents awake at night. What do you tell them? She asked. I tell them I watched it happen through my own spotting scope, Dalton said, his voice dropping an octave. I tell them you made me and every other trained sniper on that ridge look like absolute amateurs. And I tell them that anyone who underestimates you is making the last mistake of their career. Cass felt a flash of heat in her cheeks, but before she could deflect the praise, Dalton stopped walking. Look, he said, turning to face her. I owe you more than just a good job. I owe you an apology. I saw what I expected to see for 11 months. I saw a young woman in a support role, quiet, efficient, and I filed you under not operationally relevant. I never questioned that assessment. That's a failure of my leadership, and it almost cost us a mission. Master Sergeant, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. Because if you hadn't had the guts to step up and take that rifle despite being ignored, we'd be bringing that contractor home in a bag. Results are the only currency that matters in this community, Brennan. You delivered results that speak louder than anything I could say. They reached the entrance to the women's barracks, a cluster of reinforced containers. Cass paused at the door. Master Sergeant, can I ask you something honestly? Shoot, if I hadn't made that shot, if I had missed just like everyone else, would you still be standing here having this conversation? Would you still see me as operationally relevant? Dalton didn't answer immediately. He looked out toward the dark horizon, the distant mountains silhouetted against a star-studded sky. Honestly, probably not, which makes me a hypocrite. But that's the reality of the world we're in. You kicked the door down today, Brennan. The question is whether you're ready to walk through it. Cass thought of her grandfather back in Montana, the smell of gun oil and the vast, open plains where she had learned to see the invisible movements of the air. I'm ready, she said. Good, Dalton said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his gruff exterior. Get some sleep. Tomorrow at 0400, we start training the rest of the team on your wind-reading techniques. If you can teach us even half of what you know, we'll be twice as lethal as we are now. Cass made it to her bunk and collapsed, not even bothering to pull off her boots. She expected to fall into a dreamless void, but her mind was a kaleidoscope of the day's events. She kept seeing the target through the scope. The moment Commander Zahir raised his knife, the tiny, infinitesimal shift of the reticle, and the heavy recoil of the rifle against her shoulder. She had killed 3 men today. 3 human beings who had woken up that morning breathing the same air she was. That weight settled on her chest, heavy and cold. Her grandfather had always told her that taking a life wasn't something you ever got used to, and if it ever became easy, you were no longer fit to hold a weapon. Cass felt the gravity of it, a hollow ache in her gut. But beneath that, there was the simple, undeniable truth that a man was alive because of her. A family somewhere wouldn't be getting a knock on the door tonight. She clung to that thought until sleep finally claimed her. It felt like she'd only been out for minutes when a thunderous pounding on the door jerked her awake. Cass was on her feet and reaching for her sidearm before she was even fully conscious, the instinct of the combat zone overriding the fog of sleep. Brennan, you awake? It was Rodriguez's voice, loud and urgent. She opened the door to find Rodriguez, Mitchell, and Sanders standing there. They were fully kitted out, their faces set in grim lines, and several of them were carrying long guns in hard cases. What's the word? Cass asked, glancing at her watch. It was 03:30. She'd been out for less than 4 hours. Colonel Vance wants the entire sniper section at the long-range facility, Rodriguez said. Now, he's got some kind of test he wants to run. Apparently, your debriefing yesterday lit a fire under some people at JSOC. They want to see if yesterday was a fluke or if we've actually found a unicorn. Mitchell's expression was unreadable, a mix of professional curiosity and a hint of something else. They are flying in observers, Brennan. Guys from the Marine Scout Sniper School, some big hitters from the Special Activities Division. This isn't just a practice session. This is a validation. Cass felt her stomach do a slow roll. They want me to perform on command in front of an audience? Welcome to being famous, Sanders said with a sympathetic shrug. Get dressed. We roll in 15 minutes. The range they drove to was far beyond the standard qualification area. It was a specialized facility that stretched nearly 2 miles into the flat, desolate desert north of Bagram. Portable floodlights had been set up, cutting through the pre-dawn gloom and casting long, flickering shadows across the sand. As the truck pulled up, Cass counted at least 30 people, far more than she had expected. There were colonels, majors, and men in plain tactical gear who radiated the quiet intensity of Tier 1 operators. Petty Officer Brennan, Vance called out as she stepped out of the vehicle. "Thank you for joining us. I'll be direct. There are people in this command who believe yesterday's shot was a statistical outlier, an impossibility that can't be repeated. They want to see evidence." "Sir, I'm happy to demonstrate," Cass said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "But I've had 3 hours of sleep and no time to prep." "Combat doesn't wait for you to feel rested," interrupted a Marine colonel Cass didn't recognize. His voice was like gravel in a blender. "If you're as good as the reports claim, you should be able to perform under less than ideal circumstances." Cass felt a sudden, sharp flash of anger. These men had likely spent the night in comfortable beds. They hadn't spent the previous day in a life-or-death struggle on a ridge, followed by hours of interrogation. They wanted to see her fail. They wanted to prove that their world was still theirs, and that an armorer couldn't possibly possess a skill they had spent decades cultivating. "Understood, sir," she said, her voice dropping into a cold, professional register. "What's the course of fire?" Vance pointed toward the far end of the range, where steel human silhouette targets had been placed at staggered distances. "We've got steel at 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000 yards. You'll have Master Sergeant Dalton as your spotter. 10 shots total, distributed however you see fit across those 3 distances. We're looking for your hit percentage." "And the wind?" Cass asked, looking toward the horizon. "Variable," Vance said. "We timed this for right now because the thermal currents pick up at dawn. If you can shoot in yesterday's conditions, you can shoot in these." Of course they had. They had stacked the deck as high as it would go. Cass walked to the firing line where Dalton was already prone, his spotting scope leveled and his notebook open. She dropped down beside him, the cold sand pressing through her fatigues. "You doing okay?" Dalton whispered. "I feel like a circus act," Cass muttered as she settled behind the rifle. "Then show them the circus is closed," Dalton said. "Shut them up, Brennan. Prove that yesterday was just the beginning. I've got eyes on all 3 arrays. Wind is currently 12 miles per hour from the west, gusting to 15. There's a thermal layer starting to build as the sun breaks. It's going to be a mess out there." Cass closed her eyes for a second, forcing her heart rate down. She shut out the murmuring of the observers, the glare of the floodlights, and the biting chill of the morning air. She focused on the rifle, the weight of it, the cold steel of the bolt, the way the stock fit against her shoulder. She became an extension of the machine. She started with the 2,000-yard target. It was a warm-up, a way to calibrate her brain to the atmosphere. She watched the mirage through her scope, seeing it flow like a river from left to right. She adjusted her hold, felt the trigger reach its breaking point, and squeezed. The rifle bucked. 3 seconds later, a faint metallic asterisk ping asterisk drifted back through the air. "Hit," Dalton called, "center mass." A low murmur rose from the group behind them. One shot was interesting, but it wasn't proof. Cass didn't wait. She shifted her focus to the 3,000-yard target. The wind was shifting now, becoming more erratic. She watched the dust near the target and the way the heat shimmer danced in the mid-range. She recalculated the ballistic drop, a massive adjustment at this distance, and fired again. The wait for the sound felt like an eternity. Then, asterisk ping asterisk. "Hit," Dalton said, a note of triumph in his voice, upper chest. The murmuring grew louder. The observers were moving closer now, their skepticism beginning to crack. Cass ignored them. She turned her attention to the 4,000-yard target, the ghost distance. The sun was just beginning to peek over the mountains, creating a blinding glare and intensifying the thermal mirage. The target wasn't a solid object anymore. It was a wavering, dancing shape in the distance, distorted by miles of turbulent air. This was the shot that mattered. This was where the math became art. Cass stayed on the glass for nearly a minute, watching the patterns. She saw a lull in the gust, a brief window where the different wind layers seemed to align. She held her breath, adjusted her elevation dial by a fraction of a millimeter, and sent the round. The bullet's flight time was over 4 seconds. In that space of time, the entire range went silent. 30 men held their breath, watching the tiny speck of steel disappear into the desert haze. Asterisk ping. Asterisk hit. Dalton shouted, and this time he didn't care who heard the pride in his voice. Dead center. The silence that followed was heavy. Then the observers broke into animated conversation. The Marine colonel who had been so dismissive was staring through a pair of high-powered binoculars, his mouth slightly agape. Cass didn't stop. She worked through the rest of her 10 rounds, moving between the distances with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. By the time she was finished, she had hit 9 out of 10. Her only miss was a 4,000-yard shot where a sudden, unpredictable gust had pushed the bullet just inches off the edge of the steel. 9 out of 10 at extreme range, under impossible conditions, on 4 hours of sleep. It was a performance that didn't just validate her, it redefined what they thought was possible. Colonel Vance approached as she stood up, brushing the sand from her knees. "Petty Officer Brennan," he said, and for the first time his voice held something that sounded like genuine awe. "That was the most impressive display of marksmanship I've witnessed in nearly 3 decades of service." "Thank you, sir," Cass said, her exhaustion finally starting to show. "I'm recommending you for immediate placement in the Advanced Sniper program," Vance continued. "And after that, I want you assigned to a Tier 1 task force. Rank is just a number in this community, Brennan. What you have is a gift that can't be taught in a schoolhouse. We'd be fools to keep you in an armory." He gestured to the group of observers. "Half those men came here to prove you were a fluke. You just turned them all into believers. That's power. Use it." The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. Cass was officially detached from her unit and reassigned to the Special Operations Task Force. She was no longer the girl who fixed the rifles. She was the girl who could shoot them better than anyone else. She was moved into a new set of quarters and given access to the highest-end equipment the military possessed. But the biggest change was the way people looked at her. When she walked through the Chow Hall, the room didn't go silent, but the whispers followed her like a wake. On her first morning in her new role, she was called to a mission briefing. When she entered the room, 23 snipers from various elite units, SEALs, Green Berets, and Delta operators were already seated. Every single one of them stopped talking as she walked to a seat in the back. "That's her," she heard someone whisper, "the 4,200-yard girl." "Brennan," Hawkins called out from the front of the room. "Front row, you're not hiding in the back today." Cass moved forward, feeling the weight of their collective gaze. These were men with decades of experience, men who had survived some of the most brutal fighting in modern history. And now, they were looking at her with a mix of respect, curiosity, and a lingering, healthy dose of skepticism. The briefing focused on a new high-priority target. Intelligence had located a major Taliban weapons cache hidden deep within the Korangal Valley, the Valley of Death. The compound was built into a steep ridgeline, protected by natural rock formations that made it almost immune to conventional airstrikes or artillery. The only way to take it out was a precision ground assault, but the approach was a suicide mission unless the defenders were neutralized first. "The problem," Hawkins said, pointing to a high-resolution satellite map, "is the terrain. The only viable overwatch positions for our sniper teams are on the opposite ridge. The distance is significant, well over 3,000 yards. For most teams, that's a suppression distance, not a kill distance. We can't afford suppression. We need surgical eliminations of the heavy weapons teams before the strike force moves in." He looked directly at Cass, "which is why we are adapting the entire Overwatch plan to Brennan's methodology. She's going to lead the long-range element and train the team on her wind-reading techniques before we insert." A tall, lean SEAL operator in the second row raised his hand. "Sir, with all due respect, 3,000 yards is at the very edge of the 50 cal's effective range. Even with a perfect wind call, the dispersion at that distance is..." "The dispersion is a mathematical variable," Cass interrupted, her voice surprising her with its confidence. "If you understand the air, you can narrow that dispersion. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying there won't be misses, but if we map the canyon's thermals correctly, we can make those hits." The SEAL looked at her, then gave a slow, respectful nod. "Then I guess we're all going back to school." For the next week, the range became Cass's entire world. She didn't just shoot, she taught. She stood behind some of the best snipers in the world and showed them how to see what she saw. She taught them to ignore the easy wind and look for the hidden currents. She showed them how to read the boil of the mirage and how to anticipate the way a canyon floor would suck a bullet down as the air cooled. She found that she enjoyed it. There was a quiet satisfaction in seeing a veteran sniper's eyes widen when they finally got it, when a shot they thought was impossible slammed into the steel. She was no longer just a curiosity, she was becoming a peer. But the weight of the upcoming mission never left her. The Korangal wasn't a training range. The men she would be targeting weren't steel silhouettes. They were real, they were dangerous, and they would be shooting back. As she sat in her quarters on the final night before insertion, cleaning her rifle for the 10th time, Dalton knocked on the frame of her open door. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Cass said, sliding the bolt back into the receiver with a satisfying click. Dalton stepped inside and sat on the edge of the spare bunk. "You've done a good job with the guys. They trust you now. That's half the battle. And the other half? The other half is the valley," Dalton said seriously. "The Korangal eats people, Brennan. It doesn't care about your records or your championships. When the lead starts flying, everything you've learned will try to leak out of your head. You have to hold on to it. You have to stay in the math." "I know," she said. He stood up to leave, then paused. "One more thing. That contractor you saved. He was flown out yesterday. He asked me to give you something." Dalton reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered challenge coin. On one side was the emblem of a private security firm. On the other, a hand-engraved date, the day of the rescue. "He said he doesn't know your name and he doesn't need to. He just wanted you to have this." Cass took the coin, the metal cool against her palm. She turned it over, feeling the ridges of the engraving. For the first time since she'd arrived in Afghanistan, she felt like she wasn't just a part of a machine. She was a person who had made a difference. The insertion began at 0200 hours under a moonless sky. The helicopters flew low and fast, hugging the contours of the jagged peaks to avoid detection. Cass sat in the bay of the lead bird, her rifle strapped across her chest, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum in her ears. She looked out at the dark expanse of the mountains, feeling the ancient, hostile energy of the terrain. They were dropped on a narrow shelf of rock 3 miles from the target compound. The climb was grueling, a vertical scramble over loose shale and jagged granite. Cass felt every ounce of her gear, the heavy rifle case pulling at her shoulders, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. By 0430, they were in position. The overwatch point was a jagged outcropping that looked directly across the void of the Korangal toward the Taliban compound. Through her spotting scope, Cass could see the flickers of movement, sentries pacing the perimeter, the dark shapes of heavy machine gun nests positioned to sweep the valley floor. Dalton crawled up beside her, his movements silent. "Range is 3,240 yards, he whispered. "Wind is coming up the valley, about 8 miles per hour, but it's swirling in the bowl below us." "I see it," Cass said, her eye pressed to the glass. The mirage was just starting to form, a thin, watery line on the horizon. The air was cold, but she could feel the sun beginning to warm the rock beneath her. "We've got the green light from the strike force," Dalton said, his voice tense. "They're 10 minutes out from the drop zone. We need to clear those nests before they touch down." Cass shifted her weight, finding a stable pocket in the rocks. She adjusted her scope, the clicks of the dials loud in the morning stillness. She picked her first target, a guard standing behind a DSHK heavy machine gun. He was leaning against the weapon, a cigarette glowing in the dim light. He had no idea he was being watched. He had no idea that a bullet was already being calculated for his heart. "Stay in the math," she whispered to herself. She watched the wind, waiting for the swirling air in the bowl to stabilize. She saw a rhythmic pattern in the way the dust moved near a distant ridge. She factored in the temperature, the altitude, and the rotation of the earth. "I've got the call," she said. "Hold 3 mils left, half a mil high." Dalton adjusted his own scope. "Confirmed, I'm on him. Send it when ready." Cass let out a slow, steady breath. The world narrowed down to the fine lines of the reticle and the man 3,000 yards away. She felt the cold metal of the trigger, the tension of the spring. She squeezed. The rifle roared, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding in the pre-dawn light. The heavy, .50 caliber round tore through the air, a supersonic messenger of death. Cass didn't wait to see the hit. She was already racking the bolt, chambering the next round. Asterisk ping. Asterisk, the sound of the impact reached them seconds later. Through the scope, Cass saw the guard vanish, the heavy machine gun spinning on its mount. "One down," Dalton said, his voice flat and professional. "Shift to target 2, northwest corner." Cass moved the rifle, her movements fluid and robotic. She was no longer an armorer. She was no longer a girl from Montana. She was the weapon. She was the invisible force that the valley would never see coming. As the sun began to rise over the Korangal, lighting the peaks in a blood-red glow, Cass Brennan began to work. And for the first time in her life, the world was finally watching. The air in the briefing room felt thick, heavy with the scent of ozone from the nearby electronics and the unmistakable, lingering musk of men who had spent more time in the field than in a classroom. On the digital display, Complex ballistic calculations flickered in amber and green, a mathematical language that few in the room truly spoke with fluency. It was a language of drag coefficients, Coriolis effects, and air density. But to the men sitting in those folding chairs, it often felt like a secondary concern to the raw instinct of the hunt. A Marine gunnery sergeant, a man whose skin looked like weathered leather and whose eyes held the weary sharpness of a dozen deployments, slowly raised a hand. His movement was deliberate, a silent challenge before he even spoke a word. "Sir, with all due respect, we've been shooting for 15 years combined in this room," the gunny said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air. "We've survived the hills of Tora Bora and the urban hell of Fallujah. What exactly is Petty Officer Brennan going to teach us that we don't already know? Does she have a secret formula for the wind that the rest of the world missed?" Hawkins didn't blink. He stood with his arms crossed, a pillar of quiet authority against the skepticism radiating from the rows of elite snipers. He let the silence hang for a moment, letting the weight of the question settle before he delivered the killing blow to their collective ego. He looked the Marines straight in the eye, his expression unreadable. "She's going to teach you how to consistently hit targets at distances you currently consider unreliable," Hawkins replied without a hint of hesitation. "Brennan has demonstrated a 90% hit rate at 4,000 yards. That's not a fluke, gunny. That's a repeatable result. Now let me ask you, what's your hit rate at that distance?" The Marine's jaw tightened, a small muscle leaping in his cheek. The room seemed to hold its breath. "I've never engaged a target at 4,000 yards, sir. It's outside the effective range of the weapon system and the optics." "Exactly," Hawkins snapped back, his voice sharpening like a blade. "Because you didn't think it was possible. You've lived within the boundaries of a manual written 20 years ago. Brennan knows it's possible because she's done it repeatedly. She's moved the boundary. So you're going to listen to what she has to teach. You're going to apply her techniques, and you're going to extend your effective range by at least 1,000 yards. Is that clear, or do we need to discuss the definition of effective again?" The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet. Cass felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel the heat rising in her neck, the pressure of their expectations settling on her shoulders like a physical weight, cold and leaden. These men didn't want to learn from her. They didn't see a peer. They saw an interloper, a girl from the armory who had gotten lucky and was now trying to tell the lions how to hunt. They wanted to prove she was wrong. They wanted to demonstrate that their decades of grit and gunpowder trumped her unconventional methods and ranch-born instincts. After the briefing broke up, the room cleared with a symphony of scraping chairs and muttered conversations. Dalton, sensing the storm brewing inside Cass, pulled her aside into the shadows of the hallway. His face was etched with a grim kind of understanding. "You need to establish dominance early," he said, his voice a low whisper intended only for her. "These guys respect results, but they'll test your soul before they trust your data. They'll push back, they'll question every decimal point, and they'll try to poke holes in your teaching just to see if you leak. You can't let them intimidate you, Cass. If you blink, you lose them." "I'm not trying to dominate anyone, Dalton," she replied, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. "I'm just trying to share what I know. I'm trying to keep them alive." He shook his head, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "That's not enough in this community. If you don't assert yourself, you get rolled over. They won't hear the message if they don't respect the messenger. You've got the skills. God knows you have the skills. Now you need the confidence to back them up." He paused, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Remember 3 days ago? You saved a mission that 15 expert snipers couldn't save. You've earned the right to stand at that podium. Don't forget that when the sun hits the dirt." The first training session started an hour later at the long-range facility, a desolate stretch of earth where the horizon seemed to melt into the sky. Cass stood in front of the assembled snipers, her silhouette small against the vastness of the range. All of them were watching her, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to openly hostile skepticism. She had prepared notes, a meticulously outlined lesson plan on reading wind layers and calculating complex holdoffs, her handwriting neat and precise on the legal pad in her hands. But as she looked at those faces, hardened, skeptical, and judgmental, she realized that a lecture wasn't going to cut it. They didn't want a teacher, they wanted a master. "How many of you have missed shots because of the wind?" she asked, her voice carrying across the flat ground. Every hand in the group went up. It was a universal truth of their profession. How many of you have missed shots where you thought you'd calculated the wind correctly, but the bullet went somewhere unexpected anyway? Where you did the math, checked the flags, and the round still drifted into the ether. The hands stayed up. Some of the snipers were nodding now, the shared frustration of the mystery miss acting as a thin bridge between them and the woman standing before them. That's because most wind reading is based on a flawed assumption. Cass continued, feeling her nervousness start to fade as she settled into the familiar territory of ballistics. She felt the ghost of her grandfather standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder, reminding her to look past the obvious. We're taught to read wind at our position. Maybe check the wind at the target if we can see flags or vegetation. Then we average the two values and hold accordingly. But that only works if the wind is a solid block of air moving at a constant speed across the entire distance. At extreme range, that almost never happens. The air isn't a block, it's a river. It has eddies, currents, and layers that move at different speeds and even different directions. So what's the alternative? Asked a SEAL sniper named Torres. His tone wasn't hostile, but it was sharp, demanding a practical answer. We can't exactly walk out there and measure the wind at every 100-yard interval between us and a target 2 miles away. No, we can't measure it with a meter, but we can read it with our eyes, Cass said. Wind signatures are everywhere if you know how to look. Dust patterns, mirage characteristics, the specific way a certain type of scrub brush leans. These all tell us what the air is doing at different elevations and distances. The key isn't just taking data points, it's learning to see the whole picture. You have to visualize the entire flight path as a three-dimensional corridor of moving fluid. She walked them through her methodology, her hands moving through the air to illustrate the flow. She demonstrated how to identify wind layers by watching the mirage shimmer at different focal points through the glass. She explained how to use dust patterns in the mid-range to gauge speed, and how to weight different wind values based on where the bullet would spend the most time during its flight. A bullet at the end of its trajectory is moving slower and is far more susceptible to wind than a bullet at the start. Therefore, the wind at the target matters more than the wind at the muzzle. Some of the snipers leaned forward, their skepticism replaced by a professional hunger for an edge. Others sat back with their arms crossed, their faces masks of doubt. The Marine gunny, Patterson, raised his hand again. There was an edge to his posture, a refusal to be impressed by theory. This all sounds good on a chalkboard, but theory doesn't mean much when the lead starts flying and you've got seconds to break a shot, Patterson said. How do you process all this information quickly enough to take a shot when time is critical? How do you do all that math in your head while someone is trying to kill you? Practice, Cass said simply. It was the only honest answer. The same way you don't consciously think about your breathing pattern or your trigger press anymore. It's become an autonomic response. Wind reading can become automatic too, if you do it enough. My grandfather had me reading wind conditions every single day from the time I was 8 years old. Before I was allowed to even load a round, I had to tell him exactly what the air was doing between the porch and the fence line. By the time I was 16, I could build a mental wind map in under 30 seconds. Your grandfather, Patterson said, and the way he said the word felt like a slap. There was a dismissive tilt to his head. Now, with all due respect, what a Vietnam-era Marine taught a little girl on a ranch in Montana doesn't necessarily translate to high-stakes combat operations in the Hindu Kush. We aren't shooting at coyotes, petty officer. The room went deathly quiet. Cass felt the heat rise in her face, a flush of pure, molten anger trying to push its way up her throat. She could feel the eyes of every man in the room on her, waiting to see if she would crumble or lash out. But she forced the anger down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. Getting defensive would only prove Patterson's point. It would show she was emotional, that she didn't belong in their world of calculated violence. You're right, Gunny, she said, her voice eerily calm. Ranch shooting and combat shooting are very different in terms of the stakes. But the physics are identical. The wind doesn't care whether you're shooting at a piece of steel for a trophy or a Taliban fighter to save a squad. The air doesn't change its properties based on the uniform you're wearing. The bullet follows the same laws of motion regardless of the target's intent. She paused, looking him dead in the eye. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Tell you what, Gunny, let's put the theory aside and test it. You and me head to head. 10 shots each at 3,000 yards. We'll use the same rifles, the same ammo. We'll see whose methodology produces the better results on the steel." Patterson's eyes narrowed, his ego visibly wrestling with the challenge. "You want to compete in front of your students. You're willing to risk your credibility on a shoot-off. I want to demonstrate that what I'm teaching works," she countered. "If you beat me, then you're right. My methods are just ranch stories that don't translate to the real world. I'll pack my bags and go back to the armory. But if I beat you, then maybe you'll be willing to actually learn instead of just looking for reasons to dismiss me because of where I grew up." The other snipers were grinning now, the tension of the classroom replaced by the electric thrill of a contest. They sensed blood in the water. Patterson had boxed himself into a corner of his own making. If he refused, he'd look like he was afraid of a girl from Montana. If he accepted and lost, he'd be humiliated in front of his peers. But his pride, forged in years of being the best, wouldn't let him back down. "Fine," he said, standing up. "Let's do this. I've been looking for an excuse to get some trigger time anyway." They set up on the firing line 15 minutes later. Two heavy-barreled rifles sat side by side on their bipods, looking like predatory birds waiting to take flight. Both were zeroed, their optics crystal clear. The targets were positioned at exactly 3,000 yards, human-sized steel silhouettes that looked like nothing more than gray toothpicks against the shimmering heat of the valley floor. They were so far away that the sound of a hit would take several seconds to travel back to the firing line. Colonel Vance had gotten wind of the competition and had appeared as if from thin air, standing at the back of the line with Hawkins. It seemed half the base personnel who weren't actively on duty had gravitated toward the range, sensing a spectacle. "This wasn't exactly how I planned to spend my afternoon," Vance muttered to Hawkins, his eyes fixed on the two shooters. "But I'll admit I'm curious. This is the ultimate proof of concept. Brennan's going to destroy him," Hawkins replied confidently, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of nervousness. "Patterson's good, maybe one of the best conventional shooters we have. But he's still thinking in two dimensions. She's operating on a level of spatial awareness that most people can't even conceptualize. The rules were simple. 10 shots each, alternating between shooters. Hit percentage would determine the winner. A coin was flipped, and Patterson won the toss. He elected to shoot first, wanting to set the pace and put the pressure on Cass. Patterson settled behind his rifle, his body becoming a part of the machine. He took a long time to settle his breathing, his eyes glued to the scope. He was reading the flags, checking his kestrel, doing the math he had been taught for a decade. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked, a sharp crack that rolled across the desert. The spotter, a neutral party from the SEAL team, watched through a high-powered spotting scope. Miss, 2 feet left. Cass could see the frustration in Patterson's body language, a tightening of the shoulders, a sharper movement as he worked the bolt to chamber another round. He adjusted his dial, his fingers moving with practiced speed. His second shot was closer, a puff of dust rising just 6 inches to the left of the steel. His third shot finally produced the distinctive clanging asterisk sound of lead on steel, and he pumped his fist in a brief moment of satisfaction. Then it was Cass's turn. She didn't look at a wind meter. She didn't look at the flags. Instead, she stared through her scope, not at the target, but at the air itself. She focused her optic halfway down the range, watching the mirage. It looked like water flowing over hot pavement, but to her, it was a road map. She saw the way the shimmer tilted at 1,500 yards, indicating a cross-current she knew Patterson had missed. She felt the air on her own cheek, but she discounted it, knowing it was a local anomaly. Her first shot hit center mass. The sound of the hit traveled back across the distance, a delayed ping asterisk that felt like a bell of victory. Her second shot hit slightly high, but still firmly on the steel. Her third hit dead center, exactly where the first had landed. The competition continued through the 10-round string. As the minutes ticked by, Patterson's frustration grew. Each miss seemed to weigh on his next shot, his technique becoming more forced, less fluid. He was fighting the wind, trying to muscle his shots onto the target through sheer willpower and incremental adjustments. He was chasing the wind, and the wind was winning. Cass remained a statue. She was methodical, treating each shot not as a contest of ego, but as a separate problem to solve. She watched the way the dust from Patterson's misses behaved, using his failures as additional data points to refine her own mental map. She was a scientist at work, and the rifle was her instrument. By the time they'd both fired their 10th round, the score was undeniable. Patterson had hit 4 out of 10, a respectable showing at that distance for any sniper in the world. But Cass had hit 9 out of 10. Her only miss had been a slight vertical deviation on her seventh shot, likely a minor variance in the powder charge of the match-grade ammunition. The watching snipers erupted in a low roar of conversation. The skepticism hadn't vanished entirely, but it had been replaced by a profound, stunned respect. You couldn't argue with the steel. The steel didn't care about rank or gender. Patterson sat back from his rifle, his face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. He looked at his hands, then at the distant target, then finally at Cass. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Cass walked over to him. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She kept her voice low, ensuring that only he could hear her. "You're a good shooter, Gunny. Probably one of the best I've ever seen. But you're in your own head right now. You came into this convinced my methods wouldn't work, so every miss just confirmed what you already believed. You stopped reading the wind and started guessing because you didn't trust what the air was telling you." "Don't patronize me," Patterson said through gritted teeth, though the fire was gone from his voice. "You won. Congratulations. You're the queen of the range. I'm not trying to patronize you, Patterson. I'm trying to help you understand that this isn't about me being better than you. It's about the fact that at these distances, the old ways aren't enough. I have a technique that works. It's a tool, nothing more. And I'm willing to give it to you if you're willing to put your pride aside and take it." Patterson stared at her for a long, silent moment. The anger in his eyes slowly drained away, replaced by the pragmatic curiosity of a professional warrior. He realized that if he didn't learn what she knew, he was leaving his men at a disadvantage. "What was I doing wrong?" he asked specifically. Cass felt a wave of relief wash through her. This was the opening she had been praying for. The wall had a crack in it. "You were reading the wind at the firing line and the wind at the target, then averaging them," she explained, sitting down in the dirt next to him. "But there was a thermal pocket at the 1,500-yard mark, a dry creek bed you couldn't see from here. The air was rising there, creating a vertical draft and a slight lateral shift that your average didn't account for. I could see it in the mirage. Your hold-off was correct for the end points, but it was wrong for the middle section where the bullet spent the most time during its flight. You were perfect on the math, but the math was based on incomplete data." "Show me," Patterson said. "Show me how to see what you're seeing." For the next 2 hours, the training session transformed. It was no longer a lecture. It was a workshop. Cass worked with Patterson and the other snipers, walking them through the subtle visual cues that indicated wind speed and direction at various distances. She showed them how to use their scope's focus to slice the range, examining the mirage at specific intervals. She taught them how to weight those values, creating a mental algorithm that felt more like intuition than arithmetic. The resistance she'd felt earlier began to melt like ice in the sun. These men were warriors, and while they were proud, they were also professionals. They recognized elite skill when it was demonstrated repeatedly and effectively. By the time the sun began to dip toward the jagged peaks of the mountains, even the most skeptical shooters were crowded around her, asking questions, taking notes, and requesting more time on the glass. "You handled that well," Vance said as the group finally began to disperse. His voice was warm with genuine approval. "Patterson was testing you, seeing if you'd crack under the pressure of the spotlight. Instead, you used his ego as a teaching moment. That's more than just being a good shot, Brennan. That's leadership." "I just wanted to prove the methodology works, sir," she said, wiping the dust from her forehead. "You did more than that," Vance said. "You earned their respect. In this world, that's harder than hitting a target at 3 miles, and it's going to matter a hell of a lot more in the long run." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy manila folder, handing it to her. "These are your new orders. Effective immediately, you're assigned to Special Operations Task Force North as a precision fires consultant and instructor. Your rank isn't changing yet. The bureaucracy moves slower than a bullet, but your responsibilities are. You'll be working directly with sniper elements to develop advanced long-range doctrine. You're the architect now, Cass." Cass opened the folder, her eyes scanning the official language. The stamps, the signatures, the weight of the paper, it was all real. Her entire life, her entire career had shifted its axis because of a few trigger presses on a ridge. "Sir, I don't know what to say, thank you." "Don't thank me," Vance said, his expression turning serious. "You earned this, but be ready. This assignment is going to put you in a very bright spotlight. The military loves a hero, but the higher you climb, the more people there are waiting to see you slip. Just keep your eyes on the glass." He was right about the spotlight. Over the following week, the legend of the Armorer of Korengal began to spread through the military grapevine like a wildfire. It was the kind of story the brass loved, the underdog who outperformed the elites. Overnight, the quiet armory where she had once spent her days cleaning bolts and checking headspaces became a memory. Reporters from military publications started sniffing around, requesting interviews. There was even a reach out from a major news network wanting to do a human interest segment on the woman who could see the wind. Cass refused them all. She wasn't interested in being a poster girl or a headline. She was interested in the mission. The Koringal Valley operation was looming, a massive undertaking designed to clear a series of insurgent strongholds in one of the most dangerous pieces of terrain on Earth. She spent her days training the men who would go into that valley, ensuring that her techniques weren't just theoretical successes, but lived-in skills that would save lives. The training intensified until it became a blur of 16-hour days. Cass would spend her mornings on the range, her skin darkening under the harsh Afghan sun as she worked one-on-one with individual snipers. Her afternoons were spent in cramped, hot classrooms, diving deep into the physics of ballistics. Her evenings were dedicated to running practical exercises in simulated combat conditions, forcing the men to make their calculations while exhausted and under stress. Her body ached, her eyes were constantly dry from the dust, and her voice was often hoarse by sunset, but her mind felt more alive than it ever had. She had found her purpose. 5 days before the operation was scheduled to launch, Dalton found her on the range long after the sun had disappeared. The only light came from the distant glow of the base and the pale shimmer of the stars. Cass was lying prone in the dirt, her eye pressed to a spotting scope, practicing her wind reading in the failing light, trying to see the invisible patterns of the air when the visual information was at its absolute minimum. "You're going to burn yourself out before we even get to the start line," Dalton said, settling onto the ground beside her. "You've been out here since 5 in the morning. Even the rifles need a break, Cass." "I can't afford to get complacent," she whispered, not moving from the scope. The mission is in 5 days, and half the team still struggles with the transition between the 1,400 and 2,000-yard marks. If they miss that transition, they miss the target. "They're ready," Dalton said firmly. "You've trained them better than anyone else could. Patterson told me yesterday that his confidence has tripled. He's not guessing anymore. He's knowing that's your doing." Cass finally pulled back from the scope, rubbing her eyes with the heels of her hands. "Patterson's the most improved, I'll give him that. Once he let go of his ego, he started absorbing everything like a sponge. He's got the hands for it, he just needed the eyes." "That's because you didn't just teach him how to pull a trigger," Dalton said. "You taught him how to think." He paused, his expression turning thoughtful. "I got some news today from the higher-ups. JSOC is looking at creating a formal long-range shooting school based entirely on your methodology. They want it to be the new gold standard for every branch, and they want you to run it." Cass sat up, the dust falling from her uniform. "What? That's insane. Dalton, I'm a petty officer. I'm not qualified to run a school for the entire special operations community." "You're the only person qualified," he countered. "You've demonstrated a capability that didn't exist in the inventory. You've successfully transferred that capability to others. That's the definition of an instructor. What more do you want? A PhD in lead delivery." It was overwhelming, the idea of her grandfather's lessons becoming the standard for the entire United States military. It was exciting, but it felt like a mountain of pressure being dropped onto her. "When do they need an answer?" she asked. "After the Koringal operation. They're treating this mission as the final exam. They want to see how your students perform in actual combat. If the mission succeeds, if the snipers demonstrate that this new range window actually works under fire, then the school becomes a top priority." "And if it fails?" she asked, the question hanging heavy in the night air. "If it fails, then you're just the armorer who got lucky one time on a ridge," Dalton said, his voice quiet. "The spotlight cuts both ways, Cass. Success makes you a revolutionary. Failure makes you a cautionary tale." Cass thought about the 12 snipers who would be moving into the valley in a few days. She thought about the trust they had placed in her, men who had abandoned the techniques they'd used for a decade because she told them there was a better way. If they failed, it wouldn't just be her reputation on the line. It would be their lives. The cost of a cautionary tale in her world was measured in flag-draped coffins. "I need to make sure they're ready," she said, standing up and dusting herself off. "We have 5 days. That's 5 more days to drill the calculations until they can do them in their sleep. 5 more days to make sure they trust the glass more than their own fear." "Brennan, listen to me," Dalton said, standing up with her. "They are ready. At some point, you have to trust your own work. You've given them the tools. Now you have to let them be the craftsmen. How do you do that? She asked, looking out toward the dark mountains where the enemy was waiting. How do you send people into that chaos knowing that if you missed even one small detail in their training, they might not come back? Dalton was silent for a long moment, his gaze following hers toward the horizon. You don't ever fully trust it, he admitted. You'll always second guess. You'll always wonder if you could have done one more hour, one more drill. But at some point, the helicopter doors open and you have to believe that what you gave them is enough to get them home. Everything after that is between them and the mountain. The night before the operation, sleep was an impossibility for Cass. She lay in her bunk, the shadows on the ceiling transforming into ballistic arcs and wind vectors. She replayed every training session, every shot Patterson had taken, every question Torres had asked. She worried she had focused too much on the math and not enough on the gut feeling. She worried she had focused too much on the distance and not enough on the speed of engagement. At 2 in the morning, she gave up on the pretense of rest. She pulled on her boots and walked through the quiet, sleeping base to the armory. Inside, the lights were low, the air smelling of gun oil and cold steel. The mission rifles were laid out on long tables, each one a masterpiece of precision engineering. Cass went through them one by one. She wasn't just checking them, she was communing with them. She verified the torque on the scope rings, checked the bore condition for any microscopic obstructions, and ensured the triggers were breaking with the crispness of snapping glass. It was busy work, a way to channel the buzzing anxiety in her veins, but it was the only thing that made her feel useful. I figured I'd find you here, a voice said from the doorway. It was Chen. He looked as tired as she felt, his eyes shadowed. He walked into the room and leaned against one of the tables. You do realize that we've checked these rifles 40 times in the last 48 hours, right? Chen asked. If there were a speck of dust on a firing pin, it would have been court-martialed by now. Can't be too careful, Cass muttered, not looking up from a bolt assembly she was inspecting. Yes, you can, Chen said softly. At some point, careful becomes obsessive, and obsessive becomes a lack of faith. Talk to me, Cass. What's really going on in that head of yours? Cass set the bolt down, her hands trembling slightly. What if I'm wrong, Chen? What if my techniques only work on a controlled range where the targets don't shoot back? What if the stress of combat makes the mirage unreadable? I've filled these guys' heads with theory. What if that theory gets them killed tomorrow? Then you're wrong and we adapt, Chen said, his voice remarkably steady. But you aren't wrong. I've been shooting for 9 years, Cass. I've been through every school the Army has to offer. And I learned more from you in 1 week than I did in nearly a decade. You didn't give us theory, you gave us a new way of seeing. That's a practical capability, and we all know it. But it's a lot of responsibility, she whispered. No buts, Chen interrupted. Listen, tomorrow, 12 of the best snipers in the world are going into a meat grinder using your methods. They aren't doing it because some general told them to. They are doing it because you convinced them it works. You demonstrated results and they chose to follow you. That's earned trust, Cass. It's the most valuable thing we have out here. You haven't failed them in training and they aren't going to fail you in the valley. Cass felt a sudden, sharp prick of tears in her eyes. She blinked them back, embarrassed by the display of emotion. I just don't want to let them down, she said, her voice cracking. You won't, Chen said. And even if things go sideways, because it's war and things always go sideways, that's not on you. We control the variables we can and we fight the ones we can't. You've done your part. Now it's time for us to do ours. Go get some sleep, petty officer. That's an order from a friend. The operation launched at 5:30 the next morning. The air was frigid, the first light of dawn bleeding over the mountains in shades of bruised purple and cold orange. Cass wasn't on the helicopters. Her role was back at the Tactical Operations Center, the TOC. She sat in the dimly lit room, surrounded by glowing monitors and the frantic hum of radio traffic. Colonel Vance sat to her left, his face a mask of concentrated intensity. The 12 snipers had been inserted under the cover of darkness. They were now positioned on 3 separate ridge lines, overlooking the target compound deep in the heart of the Koringal. These weren't just any positions. They were Brennan overwatch points, high-altitude hides that provided clear lines of sight at distances ranging from 2,800 to 3,600 yards. These were distances that, a month ago, would have been considered impossible for coordinated fire. The plan was surgical. 8 guards were visible on the compound perimeter. To allow the ground assault team to move in without a protracted firefight, those 8 guards needed to be eliminated simultaneously. All sniper elements report ready, the tactical controller announced, his voice cool and detached. Stand by for synchronized countdown. Cass felt her breath hitch in her throat. She clenched her hands into fists under the table, her knuckles white. On the main drone feed, a high-altitude God's eye view, she could see the compound. The heat signatures of the guards were clear, small, glowing ghosts moving along the walls, completely unaware that their lives were being measured in milliradians from 2 miles away. 5 seconds, the controller said. 4, 3, 2, 1, execute. 12 rifles fired within a half-second of each other. In the TOC, there was no sound of the shots, only the silence of anticipation. On the screen, the effect was instantaneous. Cass watched as 6 of the 8 guards simply dropped, their heat signatures collapsing into the dust. A 7th staggered, took 2 steps, and then folded. The 8th guard, however, had been moving toward a doorway just as the shot was fired. He tripped the round, missing him by an inch, and scrambled to his feet, screaming an alarm that was audible even over the drone's sensory feed. Target 8 is mobile, engaging. Patterson's voice crackled over the radio, calm and professional. A split second later, the 8th guard was thrown backward as if hit by an invisible truck. He didn't get up. All initial targets down, Patterson reported. Ground element is clear to advance. A wave of tension broke in the TOC. There was a smattering of quiet applause, a few exhales of held breath. Vance looked over at Cass, a small, triumphant smile on his face. 8 targets at extreme range engaged simultaneously with a 100% success rate. It was a feat of marksmanship that would be studied for decades. Brennan, Vance said, his voice low, that was your training. That was your methodology. You just rewrote the book on Overwatch. I'm just glad they're safe, sir, Cass replied, her heart still racing. But she knew the mission wasn't over. The easy part was done. As the ground assault team moved toward the compound, the situation shifted with the violent unpredictability of combat. The guards on the perimeter had been the only visible threats, but the alarm had triggered a secondary response. Hidden underground bunkers, carved into the very rock of the mountain, began to vomit forth reinforcements. Contact! Contact! The ground element leader shouted over the radio, the sound of gunfire erupting in the background. We have multiple hostiles emerging from the northwest sector. We're pinned down. The compound was suddenly swarming. The 8 guards were replaced by dozens. The ground team was caught in the open, diving for cover behind low stone walls as machine gun fire tore into the earth around them. The sniper teams didn't wait for orders. They shifted immediately to suppressive fire. This was the ultimate test, not static targets on a range, but moving, aggressive enemies in a chaotic environment. Sniper 1 has eyes on hostile positions, Patterson called out, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of radio chatter. Counting 15 enemy fighters emerging from the northwest bunker. Engaging. Cass watched the drone feed, her eyes fixed on the heat signatures. She saw a Taliban fighter emerge from a doorway, carrying a PKM machine gun. He began to set up on a tripod, aiming toward the trapped ground team. Before he could even chamber a round, his signature slumped. A second later, a fighter with an RPG launcher met the same fate. Patterson was shooting at over 3,000 yards, hitting targets that were moving, using the very techniques Cass had taught him just days prior. He was reading the wind layers in real time, adjusting for the thermals rising from the valley floor and putting lead on target with a precision that seemed supernatural. Sniper 2 engaging, Torres's voice joined the fray. 3 hostiles down, switching to the eastern ridgeline. The snipers were working in pairs, leapfrogging their fire to ensure that the ground team was never without cover. It was a symphony of long-range destruction. Every time a hostile fighter tried to fix the ground team's position, a heavy-caliber round would find them from the heavens. The enemy was being picked apart by an invisible force they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't fight. Cass watched it all, her mind racing through the calculations along with them. She could see the wind shifting on the drone feed by watching the smoke from the ground team's grenades. She wanted to shout into the radio to tell them to hold left, to watch the gust coming off the north cliff. But she didn't have to. They were already doing it. They were seeing what she saw. The ground team managed to reach the interior of the compound, the suppressive fire from the ridges giving them the window they needed to move. Within 20 minutes, the objective was secured, the bunkers cleared, and the enemy force neutralized. All sniper elements, this is command, Vance said, leaning toward the microphone. Excellent work. Status report. "Sniper 1 is green," Patterson replied. "Rounds on target, all personnel accounted for." "Sir, tell Petty Officer Brennan the Mirage was exactly where she said it would be." Cass let out a long, shuddering breath. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes burning from the strain of watching the monitors. The weight that had been sitting on her shoulders for weeks didn't disappear, but it shifted, becoming something manageable. It was no longer the weight of doubt. It was the weight of responsibility fulfilled. Vance turned to her, his expression one of profound respect. "You did it, Cass. You didn't just teach them how to shoot. You gave them a shield. That ground team is alive right now because your students were able to reach out and touch the enemy from 3 miles away." "I just gave them the tools, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head. "No, you gave them the vision. And I think it's time we shared that vision with the rest of the world." As the mission concluded and the teams began their extraction, Cass walked out of the TOC and into the bright midday sun. The base was buzzing with the news of the mission's success. She saw Dalton standing by the flight line, watching the helicopters return. He looked at her and gave a single, sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had discussed. She knew what was coming next: the school, the spotlight, the formalization of her life's work. Her grandfather's ranch in Montana felt 1,000,000 miles away, yet as she looked out at the rugged Afghan landscape, she felt his presence more strongly than ever. She had taken a piece of that ranch, a piece of his wisdom, and used it to change the way an entire army fought. She wasn't just the armorer anymore. She wasn't just the girl who got lucky. She was the woman who had mastered the invisible, the one who had taught the warriors how to speak the language of the wind. And as the first helicopter touched down, bringing her students back home, Cass knew that her journey was only just beginning. The distance was no longer a barrier. It was a frontier, and she was the one who held the map. The air inside the Tactical Operations Center was thick with the smell of ozone, stale coffee, and the electric hum of a dozen high-powered computer cooling fans. On the massive central screens, the thermal feeds flickered in shades of ghostly white and charcoal gray, showing the chaotic reality of the compound below. The situation had spiraled. What was supposed to be a surgical strike had turned into a hornet's nest. The tactical controller leaned into his microphone, his voice tight with an urgency that rippled through the room. He reported that they were seeing 8 to 12 enemy fighters at the compound, but the numbers were lying. They had already confirmed 20 kills, and yet more hostiles kept emerging from the earth like shadows. It was a subterranean warren. Underground positions that hadn't appeared on any pre-mission intelligence were now vomiting out fighters armed with AK-47s and RPGs. The ground element leader's voice crackled over the radio, punctuated by the rhythmic, heavy thud of outgoing fire and the sharp, terrifying whistle of incoming rounds. He sounded winded, his breathing heavy and ragged. The TOC controller informed him that thermal signatures were indicating an extensive tunnel system beneath the compound and recommended an immediate extraction. The reply was instantaneous and defiant. The leader shouted that they had wounded. Peterson had taken shrapnel from an RPG, and they couldn't move him without stabilizing the bleed first. They were pinned, caught in a crossfire that threatened to swallow them whole. Commander Vance moved with a predatory grace, leaning over the controller's console, his eyes fixed on the flickering heat signatures. He asked how long they needed. The answer came back through a layer of static. 5 minutes minimum, maybe 10. They were taking fire from 3 directions, and the only thing keeping them from being overrun was the precision fire coming from the ridges. The snipers were their lifeline, but if those shooters couldn't maintain the suppression, the ground team was as good as dead. Vance didn't hesitate. He keyed his mic, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. He addressed the sniper elements, stating that they were now the priority of effort for the entire operation. He told them the ground team needed 10 minutes and ordered them to give it to them. Patterson's voice came through the comms immediately, cool and professional despite the stakes. He acknowledged the order and commanded all sniper teams to shift to rapid engagement. He told them to forget perfect shots and focus on volume. They needed to suppress anything that moved. What followed was a masterclass in coordinated sniper operations, a display of lethal efficiency that would be studied for years to come. 12 shooters, positioned across multiple hides, began working in a synchronized rotation. It was a rhythmic, devastating dance. As one shooter broke a trigger, the next was already acquiring a target, while a third was chambering a fresh round. The precision that Cass had drilled into them over the past week, that obsessive focus on wind reading and lead times, combined with raw combat aggression to create a literal wall of fire. Every Taliban fighter who poked ahead above a rampart, every insurgent who tried to maneuver through the scrub toward the ground team's position, was met with a high-velocity round. Some were killed instantly, dropped where they stood, while others were driven back into the darkness of their tunnels by the sheer accuracy of the incoming fire. It wasn't just shooting, it was area denial through surgical excellence. In the TOC, Cass stood frozen, her eyes glued to the monitors. She wasn't just watching a battle, she was watching her students apply every lesson she had taught them under the ultimate pressure. Her lips moved in a barely audible whisper as she counted the engagements. 43, 44, 45. Each number represented a life extinguished, a threat neutralized, and most importantly, another handful of seconds bought for the wounded operator lying in the dirt miles away. She could feel the vibration of the equipment in the room, the collective breath of the staff held in anticipation. After what felt like a lifetime but was actually only 6 minutes, the ground element leader's voice broke the silence. He reported that Peterson was stable and they were mobile, moving toward extraction point Charlie. The relief in the room was palpable, but the work wasn't over. The sniper teams shifted their fire, creating a moving protective barrier that shadowed the ground team as they withdrew. It was a collapsing box of precision fire, a shield made of lead and copper that shrank inward as the team pulled back toward the landing zone. It was brutal and efficient. 3 more fighters were dropped as they tried to pursue the retreating Americans. 2 more were hit and dragged back into the compound by their comrades, the dirt kicking up around them as the snipers refused to let them gain an inch of ground. The call finally came, ground element at the extraction point. Birds were inbound in 2 minutes. The heavy, rhythmic beat of rotors soon filled the audio feed as the extraction helicopters swept in low and fast, their silhouettes black against the orange-tinted dust of the valley. The door gunners opened up, adding their own suppressive fire to the mix, creating a chaotic symphony of noise. The ground team scrambled aboard, hauling their wounded with them. 30 seconds later, the helicopters were climbing, banking hard away from the compound and the hidden warren of tunnels that had nearly become a graveyard. The tactical controller announced that all friendly elements were clear of the target area. Mission complete. The tension in the Tactical Operations Center didn't just fade, it collapsed. People who had been standing rigid for 40 minutes suddenly slumped into their chairs or exhaled in a rush. Vance turned to Cass, his expression unreadable for a moment before a look of intense respect took over. He noted that they had 52 confirmed kills at extended range during a dynamic firefight. He told her that it wasn't just a success. It was a fundamental change in what they could accomplish with sniper teams. He credited her training and her methodology for saving lives and proving its worth under the worst conditions imaginable. Cass felt her legs begin to shake. The adrenaline that had been her only fuel for the last several hours was beginning to evaporate, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. She tried to deflect, telling him she only taught them what she knew and that they were the ones who executed under fire. But Vance wouldn't let her hide. He interrupted her, telling her not to diminish what she had accomplished. He said this operation was going to change doctrine across the entire special operations community. He was right. The ripple effect was instantaneous. Over the next 3 days, Bagram Airfield became a hub for the military's top brass. Senior officers from the Army, Navy, and Air Force arrived, all wanting to see the woman who had revolutionized long-range shooting in a week. They wanted to observe her methods and understand how she had turned a group of already elite shooters into something that seemed superhuman. The proposal for a formal long-range shooting school, which had been a whispered possibility just a few weeks ago, became an absolute certainty. Funding was diverted from other projects, facilities were designated, and Cass suddenly found herself at the epicenter of a tectonic shift in military training. But with success came the weight of the world. The media requests started pouring in, filtered through the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office. A congressman reached out, wanting to present her with a formal commendation. The higher-ups wanted to use her story as a centerpiece for recruitment, the narrative of the armorer-turned-legend who had changed the game. Everyone wanted a piece of her, wanting to attach their name to her success. Cass hated it. She refused every interview and every photo op, She didn't want the medals or the fame, she wanted the work. She wanted to be on the range, teaching the next group of shooters how to read the wind and honor the physics of the bullet. To her, the attention felt like a thick fog, a distraction from the reality of the lives she was trying to protect. One night, sitting in the dimmed lights of the TOC with Hawkins, she voiced her frustration. Hawkins, always the pragmatist, leaned back in his chair and told her she couldn't hide from it forever. He told her she was a symbol now, whether she liked it or not, and the military needed symbols. Cass argued that she wasn't a symbol, just a shooter who got good at reading the wind. Hawkins shook his head, pointing out that she was a woman who had succeeded in a male-dominated field by being undeniably better than everyone else. He told her she was proof that talent mattered more than assumptions, and that was a kind of power people were always going to want to harness. Cass looked at the map on the wall, the pins representing operations across the jagged landscape of Afghanistan. She told him she joined the Navy to serve, not to be a poster child for a narrative. Hawkins told her to keep serving then, but to understand that her definition of service might have to expand. He said that sometimes the biggest difference a person can make isn't in pulling a trigger, but in showing others what's actually possible. The conversation haunted her as she prepared for the official launch of the school. Hawkins was right about one thing: she couldn't control the world's perception of her. She could only control her own actions and her commitment to the craft her grandfather had gifted her. But just as she was finding her footing in this new reality, a message arrived that shattered her world. It was an encrypted notification from home. Her grandfather had passed away, a sudden catastrophic heart attack. He had been gone before the ambulance even reached the ranch. She read the words 3 times, the digital glow of the screen blurring. The reality wouldn't sink in. Jack Brennan, the man who had been her father, her teacher, and her North Star, was gone. The man who had put a rifle in her hands when she was 8 years old and told her she could see things others couldn't was no longer in the world. Dalton found her later that night, sitting alone in the armory at 2 in the morning. She had her grandfather's favorite rifle, the one she had brought to Afghanistan as a personal connection to home, disassembled on the bench in front of her. The cold steel of the components felt like the only real thing in a world that had suddenly become hollow. Dalton sat down quietly, offering his condolences. Cass didn't look up, her voice thick with a bitterness that tasted like ash. She talked about how she was half a world away playing soldier while he died alone on a ranch in Montana. She felt the crushing weight of the miles between them, the guilt of not being there to hold the hand of the man who had given her everything. Dalton, usually a man of few words, shared his own story about losing his father during a deployment in Iraq. He told her about the guilt he had carried, and how his mother eventually helped him see that his father was proud of his calling. He told Cass that her grandfather didn't raise her to stay close to home and play it safe. He raised her to be exceptional. He gestured to the rifle pieces on the table, telling her that the weapon wasn't just a tool, but a connection to every lesson and value the old man had instilled in her. He said as long as she used what he gave her, he wasn't really gone. The dam finally broke. Cass wept, the tears hot and sudden, a release of months of suppressed emotion and the fresh, agonizing sting of loss. She realized that she had been so focused on the mission and the politics that she hadn't let herself feel the gravity of her own life. Through the tears, she told Dalton that her mother had emailed her grandfather about the shot and the mission after seeing the classified reports. He had known she made it. He had known she had succeeded on the world stage just 3 days before his heart gave out. Dalton nodded, saying that dying proud of your legacy was a good way to go. The funeral took place 10 days later. Cass was granted emergency leave and made the long, numbing journey back to the high plains of Montana. The service was small, attended by weather-beaten ranchers, a few stoic Marine Corps veterans of her grandfather's era, and distant relatives. The pastor spoke of Jack Brennan's service in Vietnam and his love for the land, but to Cass, the words felt like they were describing a stranger. They didn't capture the way he could hear the wind changing before it hit the trees, or the way he could explain complex ballistics using nothing but pebbles and dust. After the mourners had left, Cass stood alone at the graveside. The headstone was simple: Jack Brennan, 1945-2011. Beloved father and grandfather, Marine Corps veteran. 22 words to summarize a mountain of a man. She spoke to the grass and the headstone, telling him she did it. She made the shot, many shots actually. She told him he was right about everything: the wind, the math, the patience. She felt a gust of wind pull at her uniform, and automatically, without thinking, she read it. 8 miles per hour from the northwest, gusting to 12. It was his final gift, a language she would speak for the rest of her life. She returned to Afghanistan the next day, carrying his rifle and a heart hardened by purpose. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had morphed into a quiet, relentless determination. The long-range shooting school officially opened 6 weeks later. Cass was promoted to Chief Petty Officer, a battlefield jump that reflected her status as the preeminent expert in her field. The first class was a collection of 20 handpicked shooters, the best of the best from the SEALs, the Rangers, and the Special Forces. On the first day, standing before those 20 men, she felt her grandfather's presence like a physical weight on her shoulders. She told them that everything they thought they knew about long-range shooting was probably wrong. Not because they weren't good, but because the conventional wisdom they relied on broke down at the edge of the world. She promised them that by the end of the 8-week course, they would be making hits at distances they currently believed were impossible. She spent those 2 months proving it. She took them into the high altitudes, where the air was thin and the wind was a chaotic beast. She taught them to see the invisible, to track the subtle movements of grass and dust across multiple layers of a valley. She taught them that a bullet's flight wasn't just a line, but a conversation between the rifle and the atmosphere. The students who arrived with skeptical smirks left as disciples. They saw their effective range stretch by 1,000 yards, then more. They realized that the limits they had lived by were merely suggestions. As the months passed, the success stories started to flow back to the school like trophies. There was the SEAL team in the Philippines that made a near-impossible rescue shot at 3,800 yards using her specific wind-reading techniques. There was a Marine platoon in Helmand that achieved an unprecedented hit rate during a chaotic firefight. Each report was a validation of her grandfather's legacy. She wasn't just teaching people how to shoot. She was giving them the tools to survive and to bring their brothers home. One afternoon, 3 months into the school's operation, Cass received a visitor she hadn't expected. David Morrison, the CIA contractor whose life she had saved with that initial record-breaking shot, walked into the mess hall at Bagram. He had recovered from his wounds and had flown back to Afghanistan specifically to see her. He sat across from her, looking at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He told her he had seen the video feed of her shot later on. He had seen the distance and the conditions. He told her that the agency's experts had said it shouldn't have been possible, that the wind alone should have made it a 1-in-a-million fluke. Cass, true to her nature, corrected him, saying it was a 1 in 10 shot if the wind was read correctly. Morrison didn't care about the math. He pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It was a picture of a 4-year-old girl with dark curls and a bright, gap-toothed smile. He told Cass that this was his daughter, and she was going to grow up with a father because Cass had done what 15 other experts said was impossible. He said he could never repay her, but he wanted her to see the face of the life she had saved. Looking at that photo, the technicalities of ballistics and MOA adjustments suddenly felt insignificant. This was the true gravity of her skill. It wasn't about records or cold precision. It was about the girl in the photo. It was about making sure the world kept spinning for the people who relied on the men she protected. She pinned that photograph to the bulletin board in her office, right next to a picture of her grandfather. They were her twin reminders of why the work mattered. A year after that pivotal day on the ridge, Cass was assigned to a new position at the Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. Her task was to develop long-range shooting doctrine for the entire SEAL community. It was the pinnacle of her career, a chance to shape the future of naval shooting. But leaving Afghanistan was bittersweet. She was leaving the school she had built with her own hands, the place where she had turned grief into greatness. On her final day at Bagram, the community she had transformed gathered to say goodbye. Dalton, Patterson, and the others presented her with gifts: a plaque commemorating the 4,200-yard shot, a custom-built rifle that was a work of mechanical art. But the most significant moment happened in the quiet of Colonel Vance's office. He handed her a letter that had arrived just before her grandfather's death. Opening it, Cass recognized the familiar, steady script of Jack Brennan. The letter was addressed to Vance. In it, her grandfather thanked the colonel for giving Cass the chance to show what she was capable of. He wrote about the 10 years he had spent teaching her, and how he always knew she was special. He mentioned that hearing about her success in Afghanistan was the culmination of every lesson he had ever taught. He closed by saying he would die proud, knowing his granddaughter was the finest sniper he had ever known. He asked the colonel to take care of her, predicting that she would change the profession if given the chance. Cass read it until the ink blurred under her tears. He had known. He had seen the fruit of his labor and the depth of her talent before he left the world. Vance told her that her grandfather was right. She had changed everything. The flight back to California was a long period of reflection. She looked out the window at the clouds, thinking about the journey from an overlooked armorer to a legend of the special operations community. She had proven that excellence was a choice, that skill could shatter any glass ceiling, and that the impossible was simply a challenge that hadn't been met yet. Her new office in Coronado looked out over the Pacific, the rhythmic crashing of the waves a far cry from the dry, whistling winds of the Hindu Kush. She hung her grandfather's photo and Morrison's daughter's picture on the wall. Between them, she placed the plaque Dalton had given her. It listed the date, the distance, and the results: 4,200 yards, 6 hits from 8 shots. Beneath the stats was a simple inscription that summarized everything she had learned. It stated that when 15 experts said it couldn't be done, Petty Officer Cassandra Brennan proved that impossible was just another word for a problem that hadn't been solved yet. That philosophy became the foundation of everything she did from that day forward. Whenever she faced pushback from the old guard or encountered a problem that seemed insurmountable, she would look at those photos and that plaque. She would remember the Montana ranch, the Afghan ridge, and the girl with the dark curls. She would remember that every limit is an invitation to push harder. And she would remember that as long as she could read the wind and trust the physics, there was nothing in this world that couldn't be hit.